It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off.
Turn it off.
I'll tell you one thing. Whoever set us up is really connected.
What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?
Relax. Soak. And don't flatter yourself.
Meet Ray Tango. He likes money,
Easy come, easy go.
but doesn't bother with cash. Meet Gabe Cash. He won't dance around trouble and doesn't mind stepping on toes.
I hate you karate guys.
Two of LA's top rival cops are having a tough time staying in rhythm.
You know me, huh?
Yeah, I hear you're the second best cop in LA.
That's funny. I hear the same thing about you.
But they're going to have to work together, even if it kills them.
Like now!
We'll take it.
No, that's one of a kind.
We won't put a scratch on you. Did you sleep with my sister?
I was so drunk, I don't remember, okay?
Sylvester Stallone and Kurt Russell. Tango and Cash.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me is Chris Winterbauer of the What Went Wrong podcast.
Hello, Mike. Thrilled to be here.
Also joining us in the booth is Ms. Lizzie Bassett, who is also of the What Went Wrong podcast.
Hi, Mike. Very excited to be here. Can't wait to talk about this movie.
Comedy month continues with a film that I suppose could be categorized as a pure action film for some, but I just have a hard time taking it seriously, and I think it's not supposed to be taken seriously. I'm talking about, of course, the 1989 film Tango and Cash, directed by quite a few people, and the film stars Sylvester Stallone as a stockbroker come supercop Ray Tango, with slobby supercop Gabriel Cash, played by Kurt Russell. Yes, they're an odd couple of cops who get sent up the river by Jack Palance as a crime boss who's French, and there's a lot of other things that happen too. We will be spoiling this film as we go along, so if you don't want anything ruined, turn off the podcast and come back after you've seen the film. We will still be here. So, Lizzie, when was the first time you saw Tango and Cash, and what did you think?
It was last night, Mike.
Oh, wow.
I watched it in preparation for this, and first I just want to say thank you, because I never would have sought this movie out on my own, and man, I laughed a lot. It's a comedy for sure. I don't know 100% whether it's an intentional comedy. I think Kurt Russell is having a blast and is absolutely hilarious. I loved his drag moment. Chris, I know you texted me that you weren't sure about it.
It was great. Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah.
However, Sylvester Stallone is on an entirely different page. Poor thing. I don't totally know what's happening, but yeah, so my review is it's a mess, and I loved it.
And Chris, how about yourself?
I saw this movie growing up, and it was one of those things. My dad, huge 80s action film fan, so Die Hard by the time I was in third, fourth grade. Tango and Cash was one that we watched, I believe, once. I've seen it a couple times over the years, but even he knew it wasn't great. Yeah, this movie shows up. It's like used to show up on TNT every once in a while, and I'd be like, yeah, I'll keep watching this movie. It just keeps changing what movie it is, right? So at first it's Lethal Weapon, and then it's a prison break movie, and then it's a weird romance love triangle with a sister, and then it becomes Mad Max at the end, and also it's James Bond. Now that I'm older and I know the more of the references, I can appreciate the pastiche. Just fuck it, let's throw everything at the wall. It's so maximalist, and I completely agree with Lizzie. Kurt Russell is a star. I love him in this movie, and Stallone is a fun contrast to that.
I just feel like it was a little mean to put him opposite Kurt Russell.
I saw this one kind of like you. I saw it many times growing up, and I just kept wanting to like it. I tried my best to like this movie, and this movie just makes me angry every single time I see it, because they don't know when to stop. it's just like you said, it's an exercise in excess. And what gets me is just last week we talked about the film Bowfinger. And in that, there's a moment where Eddie Murphy is saying, like, where's my hasta la vista, baby? I want the catchphrase. I deserve the catchphrase. Black guys don't have catchphrases in Hollywood, but all these white boys, they all have catchphrases. And this whole movie is just like those quips, one after another, after two, the point where like
they don't even make sense.
No, they don't.
Not
like,
at all.
For example, I hate Danish. I don't know what that is. Just in response
Is
to
it
the
the pastry?
Exactly,
Is it
or
the
the Danes.
I think that's a
don't know.
reference to his ex-wife. I think that's Brigitte Nielsen is a Danish. Yeah. And yeah, that.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of self-references from Stallone in this in a way that I was like,
Rambo
are the
is a
writers
pussy.
just dunking on him? Yeah.
Well, like when he attacks Jeffrey Lewis, jumping through a screen door, and then Kurt Russell says, "Is this how you screen all your guests?" I'm like, oh my God, really? That's what we're doing with this? Or there's the series at the beginning, because like the whole movie begins with basically it's a ripoff of the opening of Jackie Chan's Police Story, but this makes way less sense. This whole thing of Raymond Tango driving along, and Robert Zarr is driving truck, and he's coming towards him, and he pulls out his gun, and he's about to shoot him. And you have this whole thing of when they come out of the front windshield, he goes, "Glad you could drop in." And then he holds up handcuffs. "Do you like jewelry?"
The tiniest gun.
Oh,
also.
yes.
Oh, he is shooting a 1,000-yard shot with a snub-nose revolver with 100% accuracy.
I feel
It's
like my dad would
amazing.
be so mad.
Oh, and he unloads it to presumably put in a different type of bullet. I'm not sure what the other type is, because he's just trying to scare them. Yeah. It's a great opening. I also read that opening was not part of the original. That was reshoots.
And I don't know if they were doing if they're like, oh, we really like Jackie Chan, so we're going to take this bit from his movie, but I don't know why they chose to rip off Police Story in the beginning of this thing, but that was strange. Again, homage or what?
Homage or ripoff is a good question for the whole movie. I did really love, though, in this sequence that he just openly fires at other police officers multiple times when he's trying to prove that the tank is full of cocaine. And then maybe my favorite part of the whole movie is that the cocaine starts pouring out of the truck. Yeah. He just puts his whole hand in it, and then he just sticks it in his mouth, and he's like, "Anybody want some snow?" And I was like, are you dead? You'd be dead. Like, how much cocaine did you just eat?
Also, his defense in court is, hey, if violating people's rights and locking them up for the wrong reasons is a crime, then I guess I'm guilty. It's like, yes, you're guilty in that instance.
Libertarian police force, yeah.
It's great.
And just that who just happens to be driving by, but we've got James Hong, who I guess is representing the Triads or the Tongs or something. And then we've got, I can't remember the other actor's name, who in the script is supposed to be very Latino. So it's supposed to be almost like an Assault on Precinct 13 kind of thing, where you've got the two rivals coming together to take down all of LA. They're supposed to be the big crime bosses. And they have hired, in the script anyway, they've hired Perret, who is supposed to be French. Oh, but he's played.
His number 2 is named Requin.
Right.
And I'm like, that should be French too, but he's Cockney or something. Yeah, it's very strange.
Honestly, the fact that he was French is news to me.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Couldn't you tell by that outrageous accent that Jack Palance was putting in?
No, I could not.
Jack Palance, who would go on to win an Oscar 2 years later in City Slickers.
Yeah.
This was a fun paycheck role, it feels like.
There's so many times where he's just in a room talking to no one.
When he's watching the security footage of all of the final Mad Max fight, and it just seems like it's like he's enjoying erotica in his own basement. It's just such an unusual sequence. Oh, yeah. It's like all his guys are dying.
Yes.
He's getting more and more excited.
Oh.
It's very strange.
We have Tango already. We've got Perret and the two other bad guys showing up. And then we have to introduce Cash, of course. And we also are introduced to one of the musical themes of this. And now I love Harold Faltermeyer. Got to speak with him a few years ago about Beverly Hills Cop. But I have to say this is one of his lesser scores, especially this kid music thing. And all the kids love Cash for some
like a
reason.
sitcom.
Right?
Let's like settle into our 5-camera setup. And
I think this was where I texted Chris also that I felt like Randy Newman watching this movie because it's all these random shots of LA with that music. And I was like, I love LA. Just like, it doesn't make any sense.
Also, his introduction actually makes less sense than Tango's intro. He gets assaulted by this random guy through his door, gets shot twice in the chest with what looks like an enormous .44 Magnum. And then the minute he returns fire, that guy just bolts.
Oh, yeah.
And then we get the world's most contained car chase inside an underground parking lot. And then the most unnecessary nudity as two people who are having sex in the back of a car sit up so we can see a woman's breasts in the first 15 minutes, presumably.
It took me so long to figure out that he has a gun as part of his boot, apparently. Like,
yes, he like fires it out of his boot.
Right.
It was like, I'm wondering if that's where Robert Rodriguez got his Planet Terror inspiration. Yeah, he fires it out of his boot. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And then he has the weirdest gun. He has a revolver with
like a laser sight
largest laser sight on top of it. Like the original, it's like strapping a Palm Pilot onto the top of a gun. It was pretty amazing. Yeah.
And then we get to see him violate this poor guy's rights. Like,
yes,
big time, to the point where I'm just like, this is not funny. Like, I've seen this scene play out before in other movies. This is not funny whatsoever. This is just pure abuse of police power. It is awful to watch.
Yes, and also Kurt Russell's character in this is just casually extremely racist.
boy.
And it comes up multiple times, and it as like a character trait that they're acknowledging, but in a cool way. And I was like, oh.
Which is so weird because this movie's only 5 years after Big Trouble in Little China, which we just covered. And they do such a good job of deconstructing the action hero in that movie with his character. So it's interesting. Obviously he's just playing the role he's been given, but it does feel like a step back in terms of his evolution as an action star.
You mentioned the egregious nudity in that car chase. There's also that weird moment where there's the Russian guy. And I was wondering if it was a reference to Andrey Konchalovskiy, who's the director, one of the directors of
the
this.
fire director.
Yeah. When he's, I believe in perestroika. And then Kurt Russell's, welcome to America. Okay.
Which, it's weird because my understanding was that Stallone liked Andrey, the original director, and they both wanted to make the movie more serious. And then John Peters fired him because he wanted the movie to be more campy. And so maybe John Peters pushed for that scene. It's the whole thing's weird. It's also interesting because Jack Palance is, of course, he's Ukrainian. His name's originally was like Volodymyr. I can't remember his full name, but there's definitely some they wanted to give it let's give it a little bit of a Cold War anchor here. It's 1989 because it is unusual. There's no Russian baddies. You're expecting Russian baddies, but you don't get it's not like Commando or something like that. Like you don't get the thing you're expecting in this instance.
Yeah. No people from Valverde coming over and trying to ruin our country.
Exactly. It's all just homegrown, domestic.
Just domestic violence.
Just the French. Yeah. Exactly.
They're pretty racist through this whole thing because I remember at one point they describe Cash as a downtown clown and Tango as the Beverly Hills WAP.
They sure do. I know. I was like, wow.
Stallone was almost Axel Foley. Like he really wanted that role. And then he tried to rewrite that script to be more serious. And they're like, no. And that's why he did Cobra. And then obviously he's referencing it here. He just desperately wants he wants to be Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon so badly. And it's just not happening.
You know what's a bit of a bummer? It makes sense what you're both saying about this having been originally maybe a more serious movie when Stallone was initially attached. And you can tell that's what he's trying so hard to play in this. And it's too bad because I actually think he could have been funny. I wish that he had the freedom to loosen up a little bit in this. Obviously, there's something delicious about how stiff he is in this. But I think he is funny. So I wish he had loosened up a bit.
Oh, yeah. I love Oscar. I think he does a great job in Oscar as a comedic interpretation. And then as the same thing for even Death Race 2000. He's hilarious in that. But yeah, this one, I guess they knew that they had to have the straight man, because this is, like you were saying before, Chris, this is such a clone of Lethal Weapon. And you'll hear the screenwriter talk later about that was the assignment, was another Lethal Weapon. So it's who's Riggs, who's Murtaugh, who's Riggs, and neither one of them seem to fit into those roles very well. I would say that Kurt Russell is definitely channeling the Mel Gibson, especially with the hair and everything so much. But I don't think that Stallone wanted to be Murtaugh. He didn't want to have that stiffness on him. And it doesn't work that he is Mr. Quip as well. And they're just constant quip, quip, quip back and forth. And then all of the stuff with their penis sizes and the homoerotica.
Which, by the way, was confusing. I couldn't figure out if they were saying that it was too small or too large, because they varied between the jokes back and forth. And I was like, someone needs to explain this.
Stallone had done a lot of steroids by this point. So,
but they call him Tripod at one point.
Yes.
And then
they do, but they had just made a joke about him having a tiny penis 30 seconds before that. So I was like, which is it? You're both naked and looking at each other. Someone needs to just come out and explain it.
For the very first time that they ever meet each other, Tango's got his gun down at Cash's crotch. And I'm just like, okay, this is defining the relationship right here. And yeah, the way that they're set up, because that was the original title. This was the setup. And it's this whole thing of, okay, I guess the plan is that we're going to disgrace them, throw them in prison, but actually throw them in a different prison where they can be killed, but not killed. They're like being tortured instead of being killed. I'm like, just kill these guys. I've got a gun in my room. I'll come down.
I have a gun in my room. You give me 5 seconds, I'll get it. I'll come back down here. Boom! I'll blow their brains out.
We'll kill them together. It'll be fun.
Could be dead so fast.
Yeah.
And yet they spend so much time slowly dipping them into electrocution tanks.
Also, it's the lack of understanding about electricity throughout the movies being a running gag. If you're touching a wire, but you're not touching the ground, you can't get zapped. I don't know.
Right.
That was a cool stunt, though. Whoever that stuntman was, the leap and grab of that wire was very well done. That was an impressive shot. I just did also want to call it, because it happens early, when Kurt Russell just keeps his gun in the bottom of his unlocked file folder at the office. And he's like, who messed with my gun? And I was like, you left it at the bottom of a file folder in the middle of the office. You can't be angry.
And I guess that's the setup for them being set up, is that somebody messed with this gun, even though, yeah, I guess they just shot the poor corpse with that, and then they put the gun back, but they had to mess with his sights for that.
I don't know.
I don't know
Very
enough
about
unclear.
pistols to understand it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of this tape has all of the evidence, and I was so reminded of Running Man, and then even Strange Brew with the whole time code.
Yes.
And time code is very hard to fake.
Man, I love Strange Brew.
It was great seeing Michael Jeter in here, and it was great seeing, what's his name, Roy Brocksmith, who for me is always that creepy doctor from Total Recall that tries to talk Arnold Schwarzenegger into taking that pill. He's always so good, but he's barely in this movie. Him and Jeter are barely in this. And same with Michael J. Pollard, who, again, I love to see in stuff. And poor James Hong, barely in this movie. He's on TV most of the time.
Criminally underused. Yeah.
Then he just gets shot like 4 times and he dies. Lizzie was mentioning Clint Howard.
Yes.
It's very fun when he shows up in prison.
Yes.
Yeah, Slinky. And he's just, all of a sudden, he's just been murdered with a Slinky, basically, in the corner. Or
Silence.
Yes.
Silence,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
I always love a Clint Howard appearance. I was excited about that.
He is really good in this, and he looks so young. I'm like, oh my God. I don't know if you follow him on Instagram, but he's got like this big bushy beard right now, and it's, oh, Clint, you got to shave that down. You're looking homeless right now. And I don't know why Jeffrey Lewis isn't credited as one of the 2 captains, but yet Eddie Bunker is.
I do love the state trooper who just gets in Stallone's face in the cold open and he just starts screaming at him. What the fuck do you think you're doing? It's just like a deputy screaming at like this detective. It's great. It's great. This movie. Oh, and just Kurt Russell, the first place he goes after he gets out of jail is the police munitions supply.
Isn't that what
and
that
he just
is?
walks. It says police munitions testing.
Okay.
And he just walks in. He's like, hey, don't tell anyone I'm here. Like walks through the middle of a warehouse. It's great. I just think it's so
It's I'm on
every
board.
time they were like, would this happen? They just said, don't think about it. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. And they just kept going. They just kept pushing the movie forward. It's great.
The pacing of this movie is so strange for me too. Once they get to jail, it seems to take forever for them to break out of jail. And just the escape scene of them breaking out takes so long. Like you were saying, the debate about electricity, watching Robert Zarr die from electricity for it feels like 5 minutes.
Yeah. They're like, this is a great shot. We're going to put all of it
Oh, yeah.
in the movie.
Every single bit.
It's also, I think, it's one of those things where every time you change what the movie is, it resets audience expectations about where in the story they are. And I think that makes the pacing really difficult because when they go to prison, then you start to think, oh, maybe it's a prison break movie. It'll be them attempting to adapt and then them figuring out a way to exonerate themselves if they can get out and get the evidence. There's none of that. It's just for no reason, Tango just says, I think I'm good in here. And then Cash, no, we should go. And then Tango's like, I couldn't let you go on your own. And then they leave. And then we're in a new movie, which is, and then they split up, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And that also resets expectations. But they get out and they just go, all right, I think it's tough. I'll see you at this club. And I was like, wait, why are we splitting up? What are we doing? And then it becomes, like a weird romantic three-way thing with his sister, which was
maybe the best.
It was
part.
pretty good.
It was pretty good.
Yeah.
The last third of the movie, I was like all the way in.
Yeah.
I would have loved more Kurt Russell and Terry Hatcher in drag atop the motorcycle. The way they flicked their cigarettes at the police officer who was asking for a three-way, I was absolutely clapping, standing up and clapping at the TV.
And also this movie is very homophobic because obviously the Dykes
For
on
sure.
Bikes
Yeah.
reference that they do there. So I misunderstood when he looked at the costumed person who was walking past him, Kurt Russell, in the club, and he says, what size do you wear? I actually thought it was an Elvis costume at first, and he was going to do a reference to playing Elvis with John Carpenter earlier in his career. And I was like, oh, if there's a Rambo reference, now we have an Elvis reference.
Nope.
And then I did not expect the full drag that followed.
No.
I was like, he's coming out as the king. And then it was like, let's go for it.
There's more references to Arnold Schwarzenegger than there are to Kurt Russell movies. And I guess his role was supposed to be played by Patrick Swayze at first, but he went on to do one of the best films ever made, Roadhouse, in the same year. He definitely made the best choice with that one.
I think Swayze would have to play the straight man in a way. Like he quit. He's like Stallone, right? Like and so that would have been so much clunkier if it was just because at least there's a lightness to Kurt Russell that when he's in the scene or there's an awareness of what he's doing, is my point. And that where you're like, okay, he gets it. We can all laugh and have fun together and enjoy the insanity that is this movie. And I think that would be really hard with Swayze and Stallone. And I love Patrick Swayze, but I think Kurt Russell was a much better fit.
I do too, especially with his character being particularly racist. And it's like there's only Kurt Russell could make this watchable with the way that some of this stuff is written. I also, every time the movie changes, it feels like the movie within a movie in Tropic Thunder every time. It is like a parody of an action movie every turn it takes. And again, I loved it. I would watch it again.
I read the script for this, and there are elements that carried through. But I would say once you get to the prison scene, that's where things really start to differ, or sequence, I should say. And after they get approached by Matt Sukowski, the assistant warden with the thickest Chicago accent I've heard since The Fugitive, the way that right after that, it basically becomes, we need to escape right then, right? We have to get out of here because we're going to get put back in General Pop. There's a whole other thing that happens in the script where they suddenly, I think it's Cash attacks Tango while they're in the prison yard, and it becomes this huge fight, and they're just battling with each other. And what they're setting up is that they are going to be pulled apart, and they're going to actually have a real fight at the prison, which is very similar to Runaway Train, which is funny that that's removed. And I don't know if Konchalovskiy was still around while that was still on the table or not, but they're like, oh, we're having this big fight on Friday, so that way no one will kill them in the meantime, because there are all these guys that wanted to kill them, but there's one guy, I think he's called Oddsmaker, who is collecting all this money, and he's setting up all these bets, and it's just going to be this huge, massive fight. And then whoever wins the fight, the criminals agree that they're going to kill that person. But in the meantime, they're hoping that Tango will kill Cash or Cash will kill Tango. And yet they're setting up this whole prison break. And that's when the whole movie kind of goes off the rails. There's no drag scene, which I know was John Peters loves putting his actors in drag. He has both Kevin Kline and Will Smith in drag in that Wild Wild West movie, which I think is like John Peters' ultimate film. He's even got a mechanical spider in that.
We have to cover Wild Wild West at some point on what went wrong.
And this movie came out almost exact at the time that their company was being acquired with Columbia by Sony. Sony bought Columbia Pictures, and then Sony poached from Coca-Cola. Sony poached John Peters and Peter Guber from their contract at Warner Brothers for $200 million. And then Warner Brothers sued Sony for $1 billion.
There's a major lawsuit around that.
For breach of contract. And then Guber and Peters just basically decided we can do whatever we want. And then also Guber got Peters fired, I think, or he had to exit the company within a couple years of this movie coming out. And he went on to do his own other thing. So this was like super tumultuous time at the top end as well in Hollywood.
This is the same year that they produced Batman that had just come out in June. This comes out in December. And between the two, yeah, it was a major rigmarole. That Hit and Run book is incredible to read about Peters and Gruber and just how unhinged Peters is.
I think he felt like he had carte blanche in a lot of these situations, and he knew better creatively than everybody else. And it certainly led to some wild times.
Speaking of wild times, I want to know what kind of club Terry Hatcher works at, because she's not a stripper. She seems like she should be a stripper, but she's not. Obviously, in movies, there's been 100 strippers that just never take off their clothes. Sin City, Striptease, just so many of these films. But yeah, she's doing some Sheila E. type drumming on stage. They've got that massive fan. The previous act, they actually had a motorcycle up on stage.
Yes, I loved that. I would equate it to a Jumbo's Clown Room type situation, plus drumming. I feel, if anyone is not familiar with Jumbo's and you happen to be in LA, great little club up in East Hollywood, but it's very like tongue-in-cheek, kitschy. I think it's like a burlesque act, essentially, would be how I would qualify it. I would go. It looked great.
It looked amazing. And it was packed. That place was packed for, I don't know, whatever night it was.
As is Jumbo's, let me tell you.
And the irony is they undercut the, let's make it a little less expected, right? It's not going to be a strip club. It'll be burlesque. We'll have a motorcycle. That's all really cool. We'll do Terry Hatcher play the drums. And then, but we're going to send Kurt Russell into the dressing room so we can get a shot of like 7.5 breasts, just so the audience is covered, and for no reason in this next scene.
They may not be naked on stage, but they're definitely naked in the dressing room.
Yeah, for no reason, by the way. It's not like a costume thing. If they were strippers and they were, I guess strippers don't have to be fully topless.
Yeah. Thank God I can take these clothes off now. When women are just together, they're topless, right? That's how it is.
I'm surprised there wasn't a pillow fight happening there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was very late
but
80s.
At the same time, if Kurt Russell comes into my dressing room, I'm probably just stripping for him right there. Especially in 1989, Kurt Russell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah. Even a 2024 Kurt Russell, I'd probably be doing that.
He's gotten into his nice bear phase now in a good way. I think he's peaking again in a way that maybe he hadn't been for a while.
80s Kurt Russell?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's the thing, Kurt Russell, for me, always. Like, big, huge beard, big floppy hat. Yeah.
And it was nice that they liked Brian James so much that they kept him in so much of this movie, because he was only supposed to have one scene, but he shows up in the prison. He shows up again later. He's the one that's setting up all this stuff for Perret. And they're doing the whole hanging off the building thing. And then again, they get to violate his rights by taping a grenade into his mouth.
Grenades, not standard police issue, but they had a lot. They had a lot of them.
But then again, he did go to visit Michael J. Pollard, who just happens to have a pile of clothes and a whole rack of guns here. So maybe that's where he got the grenades from. Or maybe when Stallone, that whole weird scene, he goes to a tire store and he's making a call to somebody talking about his favorite stockbroker or something. And then he steals a guy's shirt just to cover that he has a different shirt on later on when he's threatening the FBI guy. Look, what is going on here?
He was very concerned about his sugar stocks, if I recall correctly from that phone call. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think the more that you let it just wash over you, the better it gets.
Not killing Renquin or doing anything with him other than just leaving him there so he can come back later in the film.
They could have just killed them. They could have killed them.
Yes.
Why wouldn't you just, first of all, this movie could have been 10 minutes long, because if the whole goal was to just kill them, if you're framing them, just frame them and then kill them. It's so much easier. You can plant any evidence you need on them. Why would you send them to a court case and then he's good? They're locked up, and they're locked up for 18 months, sir. That is not a long sentence. If you wanted them gone, kill them.
Also, they got 18 months for premeditated murder. We protect our own. 18 months. Yeah, then you guys will be out of there. You'll be back on the street. That was great. Jack Palance, just what a career. I remember him most from Shane. I'm a big fan of that movie, and I love the book. And then just like this villain is like such a pale comparison to so many of the villains he's played before. Not his fault. Just there's no motivation. He's like, we run a multi-million-dollar business. That's not how you deal with a
They're costing me too much money. That's all it was. And you know what? That's all I needed. It was fine.
What would cost a lot less for him is somehow he's got closed circuit TVs that show James Hong and the other guy, and he's talking with them, and this is huge TV bank, and he's yelling at him and stuff. And I'm like, how are you even doing that? This is 1989. How are you closed circuiting these guys in here? We're not FaceTime. Even when it comes to Michael J. Pollard in that super SUV that they have, like he's on screen giving them advice and information.
Yes.
I'm like, how the hell is this happening? Are you up on the starship beaming yourself down? This is bizarro how you guys are doing this.
By the way, was that a prototype for the Tesla Cybertruck? Because it looks like it. It looks a lot like it. And
I guarantee you Elon Musk
true.
asked if he could have a minigun on the side of his Cybertruck. But can it have
hello,
a minigun?
yes. Is it possible to give me a truck that looks like the car from Tango and Cash?
Yes. Don't say no. Don't say no. I will fire you. Don't say no.
It's me, Michael J. Pollard on the phone. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that car was amazing. The quips in that scene are amazing. Don't worry, we're fully insured, which I think is supposed to be played as a joke, but then it's treated as if it's genuine. What's insured? I did like that the villain hideout effect warehouse looks like if one of those Bass Pro Shop pyramids made love to a warehouse. That's just what it looks like with all the glass on top of it. And then the villain cars, they actually have red and blue on top. Like they're converted cop SUVs that have like rocket launchers on the top. And I was like, where did you get those? Why are there cop cars like in the villain spot in the end? Anyway, it was just great.
Again, had this gone full parody, I think it would have worked, but it's just, it wants to be the thing that it's parodying while it's parodying the thing that it wants to parody.
It's like the Wicker Man, the Cage one, where it's like, it's that close. It's almost there.
When all those bad guys have their own versions of super SUVs or super trucks that they have, it's like, where did they get these? What is going on? And I just kept thinking of like better movies while I was watching, and I was thinking of all things Arnold Schwarzenegger Raw Deal and his whole thing through the scrapyard at the end when he's playing Jumpin' Jack Flash. I was like, oh yeah, that's a great scene. And I'm like, why aren't I not watching that movie instead? Why am I watching this? And the way that they come into the place and in those big earth movers, they have to go from the souped up SUV to now they're in earth movers, and they have the big fight with Requin and this other guy who just happens to show up And I love that one of the first moves that this other baddie does is he breaks a glass case that's filled with glasses.
He did. It's like a high kick all the way down. Yes. Yes. It was a great move. Yeah. He just showed up and he was like, it was like Van Damme showing up in the third act of the movie. I was also thinking about Demolition Man because that felt like the tone that this movie should have gone with. Because Demolition Man is very funny and it knows how silly it is. That's half the joke of the movie. I was also thinking about The Nice Guys when you mentioned the chemistry not working. Because I was like, The Nice Guys works because Gosling knows how stupid his character needs to be to make that movie work. Movies from this era, what are you going to do? Some of them really work in a hokey way and feel timeless. And then this one, it's every time where you're like, just turn right, they turn left. And what are you going to do? Fun.
So apparently Perret is also a big fan of Lady from Shanghai or Enter the Dragon because he has one of those rooms filled with mirrors built for him. Though what should be the chase through the mirrors and all that kind of stuff, basically the doors open, they go, you got him? Yeah, okay, I got him. And they shoot him in the head.
Double headshot, which I'm so here. Lizzie, tell me, were you thinking about, and I texted you about Vin Diesel while you were watching it. I could not stop thinking about the Vin Diesel, The Rock, and the Jason Statham thing where none of them can lose a fight in the Fast and Furious movies. And it's like written into their contracts. And none of them can hit any fewer punches than the other because that felt like this movie too. Like it felt like Stallone and Russell to the point where they both had their own headshot on the guy. And I actually thought what they were going to do is there was going to be one bullet hole and they were going to try to imply that they were going to have to fight over who had headshotted Jack Palance. And that they were like, no, we'll just give them double headshot where you shoot this guy twice through the head.
And they had the exact same way of telling how to get him. They were like, how did you figure out? And he's, I saw what does he say? I saw the like watch reflected or the monogram and then the ring. Yeah, that the reflection was wrong in both. And it's, you didn't even have a different trick. It was just a different item that you both noticed. Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. It should have been one of them saying, I guessed. I didn't want you to know, and I didn't.
Why would it be one person being like, I saw the reflection reversed, and the other one's, I also saw the reflection reversed, but in a different way than you did? Like, God damn it, guys.
Yeah. And they could have played that up. That could have been their thing. It reminds me of that joke from Running Scared where they're debating about who stopped the car with their guns.
I can't believe that you missed all 6 shots.
What are you talking about? I hit the windshield 6 times in a row.
No. Excuse me, sir. All 6 of mine hit. I don't know where the hell you were. I'm the one who made him swerve.
Oh, you made him swerve?
Yes, sir.
You always aim low anyway.
Oh, let's do height jokes now, Ray. That's really good.
That kind of stuff is good. That movie for me is like the perfect mix of comedy and action, whereas this one is just like, whoa, can you guys like just take a breath somewhere in here? There's no breathing room in this movie whatsoever.
Just quip. Every scene ends with 4 quips in a row. And then even just the ending, poor Terry Hatcher sitting there as they debate whether or not they're going to let Kurt Russell date her. It's just so uncomfortable.
She's such a piece of meat in this film. We've had 2 hours together where your sister gave me a massage and now I want to marry her, basically. What?
And then they high five over her, which is like a really weird image that they're like high fiving each other over this woman that they've agreed now Kurt Russell can own in some way. It's really bad. It's not a good look. And then, of course, they match cut to a newspaper where, of course, she's no longer present. It's just about the 2 of them again. It's like,
what's it say on the newspaper? Don't ask the critics or ask not what the critics say over on the right-hand side. Over where it says heroes again. And I'm just like, is this a message to us? Ask not what the critics say. So strange. All right, let's go ahead and take a break and we're going to play a couple of interviews. First up, we'll hear from screenwriter Randy Feldman. And after that, it's executive producer Peter MacDonald. And we'll be back with both of those right after these brief messages.
Classicy is a film journey to the East, a curated streaming service offering the best of contemporary and classic cinema from Eastern Europe and Asia. Using coupon code Mike50, you can get Classicy membership for just $5.50 a month, giving you the opportunity to sample award-winning films, documentaries, silent masterpieces, classic comedies, and more. You could also get access to the Classicy Journal, exclusive cast and director interviews, video essays, and watch lists. Visit klassiki.online and sign up now to start your adventure in film.
From what I understand, you come from a Hollywood family. You're a legacy.
Yeah, I guess I am. My father was a producer. He was mostly on the business side during his career, but he did produce The Wild Bunch and a number of other films, two of which, The Wild Bunch and The Ballad of Cable Hoagie, produced for Sam Peckinpah's director. And I grew up in the business, but was able to observe it from the inside, and went to the University of California at Berkeley, and at some point made the decision I wanted to be a writer. I can't even tell you why I made that decision. It just seemed like a good decision at the time. And my brother, who was teaching, my brother Dennis, who also is a screenplay writer, and we wrote mutually, was teaching photography in San Francisco. So I would cross the Bay Bridge and hang out with him. And I said I wanted to be a writer. And he said, why don't we write screenplays? Because we know how to do that. And we thought we did. But the truth is the process for us took a little while because it's a very precise skill. And though we had been reading them and were familiar with them over the course of time, it still took us a little while to really get in the groove of what was required for a screenplay, particularly one that was camera ready. So we spent a number of years writing screenplays together. And after about 6 or 7 years of the usual sort of getting kicked in the teeth, we both had success, and we've alternately had success together and apart. Ironically, we've really had more success apart, but we learned together and are still quite close. He's actually given up the entertainment writing business. I have not. He's a bit older than me. He's retired from that and doing his own art.
Around what years were those? When were you learning the trade?
I'm an old hand. At that time, though, when I started, I was a baby writer, but that would have been, I graduated from Berkeley in 1977. So that would have been in the mid-70s. So we were really watching the cusp of the emergence of the recent great ones, Spielberg and Lucas and Scorsese, and that new breed that came through and changed the thinking about even movies, and Star Wars being a perfect example of how movies became a different kind of experience, and they weren't doing David Lean films all the time anymore. They were moving towards a younger audience and more special effects. And I guess that was where we got our commercial. That's the timing of it. So, and during that time, there was this notion of high concept. So screenplays became what they called high concept. Alien comes down to Earth, or E.T. in your neighborhood, or Big Shark, although that's a bestseller, so that's a little different. But so screenplays became somewhat valuable during that period of time towards the mid-70s, towards the 80s, and into the 80s as an entity of intellectual property. And they got away a little bit from remaking Dickens novels, which is certainly a worthy thing to do, but that it became a different sort of medium in that way. And there was a lot of opportunity for what we call spec writers like Dennis and I, where we would write speculative scripts from ideas we thought would make good movies. And then you give them to your agent. He would send them out to sell them and try to auction them off and get several people, entities or studios interested in them. And that's how you tried to make money and get movies made. And that was the formula back then. It's changed significantly now, I believe. But that was the era that we grew up in.
And it also makes sense. You're talking about the movie brat era and being in San Francisco. At first, when you said that you went to Berkeley, I was like, why not UCLA? Why not USC? But that was that era of things being possible in San Francisco with Zoetrope and all that.
That too, but I was really anchored in LA and grew up in Hollywood, though I didn't feel like I was really a citizen of Berkeley. Truth is, I didn't really, when I went to Berkeley, have any notion that I wanted to be in entertainment necessarily. I felt I wanted to be a writer at a certain point in college, and I determined I wanted to be a writer. I tell you, Dennis gave me the idea, well, I might as well go into this. We can we know how to do it. We can make some money and we can learn how to write. So that was what led me into it. I can't say I was heavily focused or directed in that way initially. So we knew I felt I was always coming back to LA probably to live anyway. I enjoyed growing up in LA. So there was no really question that I was going to stay up there. It was always directed towards Hollywood, which we were pretty familiar with and even familiar with some of the people there.
Was Hell Night, was that one of the first scripts that you sold?
Hell Night was not really the first script I sold. The first movie I got made, the first script we sold was a mutual script we wrote called Night Riders. We sold another one way back, which was, we called it a Gothic Star Wars. We wrote a treatment where it's a all-star monster movie, and it went to AIP, went to Samuel Arkoff's company at AIP. And that was really our first break into the movie professional category. And we wrote that together. And we made a couple bucks on that. And we tried to get it made, and it couldn't quite get made, and it got close, and the usual Hollywood story. And I went to work for a guy named Bob Stivers. Bob Stivers was a very nice man who he did Circus of the Stars and People's Choice Awards. He had a very close relationship with Procter & Gamble, so he could get shows on the air just by having them come as a sponsor. So I worked trying to research for a show he wanted to do called Mother's Day, which is going to be a Mother's Day show. And I went to the office every day for about 3 or 4 weeks, and I hated it. And I walked into his office. I said, enjoying this. He said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be a writer, but I'm not sure if I can make a living doing that. And that's why I took this job, and I can write at the same time. I said, if you want to be a writer, go be a writer. And during the course of this job that I disliked, I think I stayed a couple more weeks because I wanted the income. And I wrote Hell Night. And it was it was basically inspired by Bob Clark, Black Christmas, which I think is one of the terrific horror film that I've ever seen. I just love it. It's got some weird stuff with the piano stuff and Keir Dullea and stuff. You familiar with it? You probably, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I love that movie.
Yeah, a great movie, and I loved it. And I'd always been a fan of horror ever since I was a kid, and not so much slasher movies at all, because I don't really like torture porn and slasher movies. But I love shock and suspense movies, and ever since I was a kid, I loved those kinds of movies. So I sat down and I wrote it, and I sent it over to Irwin Yablon's company, who had done Halloween. And it sat there for a number, I don't know, but anyway, a guy named Bruce Cohn-Curtis picked it up off the desk, and a guy named Mark Lester, who was a director, also grabbed it and looked at it and said, well, this could be a movie. And they called me up, and I sold it to them. And lo and behold, they made it. And I guess I was about 24 years old at that time. So I was pretty young to get my first movie made. And that was the first movie that got made, not the first script. I wouldn't say I was an accomplished writer, but I had some professional experience at that point.
It's always so difficult for me to talk to writers because you are working constantly, but it's like the lottery as far as what gets picked up, what gets made. So can you walk me through what were the 80s like for you?
The 80s that was like the springboard of my career. Like I said, I went through, after Hell Night, I was able to get a job at Avco Embassy writing something. And it was killing as an organized sport, chaos. There was this game that was going on during that time at colleges where you get a card of, everybody would play assassin, and you get a card of a target. And the target would maybe have another target. That target could even have you. And they play with about a dozen people, and they'd run around the campus, and you would try to find your target and kill them. And if you became so the obvious idea was, somebody really starts getting killed and somebody in the game is playing for real, right? Pretty cliche idea. They actually had another movie called Tag, which was the equivalent idea. So we wrote that, and then things were a little slow after that. I called my brother in, and we both wrote it. And then I was writing original, and I would write, 3 or 4 scripts a year and just send my agent a spec and see if it would fly. And during this time, I sold something to Disney on a pitch, and then wrote the script. It was called Street Soldiers, and it was Dirty Harry Meet the Warriors, I would say. And apparently Michael Eisner had been screaming that weekend I want another Dirty Harry Meets the Warriors script or something like that. I seemed to just have the perfect script at the perfect time. So it went to Disney, and that was a deal that I said, okay, I can now make a living at this. And I'd had a kid, a wife and a kid, and was living in the Hollywood Hills. And so at that point, I started and kept writing original. And during that time, I left that particular movie, but it wasn't made into a script. They were going to rewrite me. And a script came in called Lethal Weapon. And they were looking for writers. And I said, grab this guy. Grab Shane Black and get him to rewrite my script. If you're not going to let me write it, let him rewrite it. This guy's really good. And I looked at this script and it was Marvel. The script was strange, conversational, reference the readers, was just visceral. And it was a new style of writing that kind of was like Goldman, but even more current in a way that I can barely explain. If you've ever read the original Lethal Weapon script, and I actually have a copy of it, it's an extraordinary script in just the way it reached out to the readers and the kind of informal way it was handled. So I said, wow, you can really do that? And so I started to write a script called Man to Man, which was about a repo guy that discovers repos a car and discovers a guy in his trunk, and the guy turns out to actually be an alien. And this script launched my career. This script was a really good script, and it went out through my agent at ICM, and it was one of these things where they used to, if they thought it was really a hot script, they'd literally get the executive or the producer's reader or lieutenant, put him in a room at ICM and make him read the script right there. And then they wouldn't let him out as a preview. And they sent out the script and I got 6 offers from all the studios. It was a very hot, auctioned off script. Ultimately, Joel Silver was attached. He attached Arnold Schwarzenegger to play the alien, the guy who the alien invades his body, and all sorts of things happened. And the permutations of Hollywood are such that it didn't get made for various reasons. If you want to hear, I can go into in depth. But anyway, that launched my career. And I sold that for a good deal of money. And now I was an established screenplay writer. And that was 1986. So I think the Disney thing was 1985. And I'm quite certain I sold that. I know when I sold that in 1986. And that was after about, as I said, 7 years of getting my teeth kicked in, trying to make it. And that's pretty typical. The 7-year cycle is pretty typical for writers.
You talked about Lethal Weapon, which didn't necessarily kick off Buddy Cops. Buddy Cops had been around for a while, but it really put a new life into it and started this whole trend of, okay, we've got the uptight guy and the wild card. You've got your Peter Weller and Sam Elliott, or Michael J. Fox and James Woods. So it must have been pretty much a no-brainer that you're going to now create your own buddy cop film.
Yeah. If you're leading to Tango Cash, you'd think that was the story, but it actually wasn't at all. I was quite baffled by the whole thing. They have Lethal Weapon franchise at Warner's, and there was a producer named John Peters, you're probably familiar with. And I had moved over to CAA, and CAA sent me over, and they called me up, and they said, Roger Birnbaum, who was John Peters' president of that company right there with Goover Peters, John has this idea, and he wants to do The Quiet Man. And he said, let's do it about cops, but it's The Quiet Man. So I went in, I talked to Roger, and he says, yeah, it's The Quiet Man, and the guy, one of the cops falls in love with the other cop's sister. And I said, yeah, I knew John because my father had dealt with John when he was president of First Artist, and Barbra Streisand was making A Star Is Born, and John was her boyfriend at that time, and was going to, even at that time, had been put up to direct A Star Is Born, but backed out at the last minute from directing it. I don't know if you know that story, but there's behind A Star Is Born, or that version of it. I had some familiarity from when I was younger with John, and I said to my agent, I said, look, that doesn't sound like John. There's something, I want to go in and talk to him and figure out what he's talking about. I went in and they were there, and John said, he's a kind of volatile figure. And I said, he looked over at Roger and said, I just wanted to hear what you were thinking, John. And he looked over at Roger and said, why is he wasting my time? I thought he was going to pitch me something and this and that. I said, no, Roger didn't ask for the meeting. I asked for the meeting. He looked around and he said, oh. So he sent Roger and Stacy Snyder, who was about the third in command later, who became a very big powerhouse in Hollywood, sent them out of the room. And John said to me, yeah, here's what I want to do. What? Rich cop, poor cop, the east side, west side, and then they go to jail. And then one of them they come out and one of them falls in love with the other guy's sister. And so they have that conflict. And I thought to myself, they're the two cops in LA and this and that. I said, I'm thinking, you already got Lethal Weapon. I don't know why you would want to do that, frankly. It didn't make sense to me that Warner's wanted another franchise like this. But Goober and Peters, and particularly this was John's idea, had a good deal of muscle there. So they were able to push through what they wanted to push through. And the one thing that I thought when he was talking to me is the one thing that would work for me is the one-upsmanship. I felt there would be some amusement in the one-upsmanship between the two guys. And that's what survived through the course of the script. That tone, even though when you do a Hollywood movie with the strong personalities involved that were involved in this film, you don't get exactly what started off in the script. You get a combination of a lot of people's ideas, impressions, and, prejudices. So that was the part that I thought I could really make work and would be fun. So that's how I ended up writing Tango and Cash. It was John Peters' idea originally. I got the gig, and that's what I felt was the engine of the project.
I read it not too early of a draft. I think it was towards the end of 88 when it was still called The Setup.
If you read The Setup, you read a pretty early draft. It got called Tango and Cash because Stallone had just done The Lockup. And so so we're in the rehearsal, and it's all the way to the rehearsals. Actually, it's called The Setup. Yeah. But I did write under the name The Setup. I wrote about 11 drafts in about 3 months. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. As one guy told me afterwards, who was a guy named Alan Rich, who was head of TriStar, he said, "You really rode the rocket on that one. You'll be able to do anything after that," which is true. I think that the greatest quote I'd have to give it to you in context. We had a meeting one time at John Peters' house up in Beverly Park, and we left, and it was just like craziness. We didn't have an ending to the movie. We didn't have the love story nailed down yet. And we were going to this was a Friday. We were going to start shooting on Monday. And Larry Franco, who turned out to be Tim Burton's line producer primarily, but was on this film, a younger Larry Franco, said, "Look, I don't know what you're going to do and how you're going to do this, but I need pages for Monday because we're going to shoot. So make sure we got the pages for Monday and Tuesday. We're going to shoot." And I said, "Have you ever seen anything like this, Larry?" He says, "I've never seen anything nearly this bad, and I was on Apocalypse Now." We had a bit of a mess at the beginning of that. And I think it was reported in the trades and stuff that the movie was a mess, as a lot of those movies in Hollywood were made at that time. The priorities were not to get the best script possible and shoot. The priorities were, we're releasing on this date. We've got this star. We'll put it together somehow. So I'm in a meeting with Stallone, and we're talking about it. He says, "We can't call this Setup. I just got done doing Lockup." He said, "There was this guy who was one of the consultants on it and on Lockup, and his name was Ray Tango. I want my character to be called Ray Tango." And I said, "Okay, so Tango," and he's Cash. His name was Cash. The character originally was supposed to be, and I should mention that one of Peter's great wishes and dreams was to put Stallone and Schwarzenegger together in the film. Schwarzenegger never got into it, obviously. I think they talked to him, but he wasn't going to do it. And Stallone switched over to a part that was named DeBerg. So he changed his character from DeBerg to Ray Tango. The Cash character was always named Cash, and then Kirk played the Cash character. So we'll call it Tango and Cash. That's how it became Tango and Cash. Anyway, so it was set up, but I don't know which draft you read. There were many. And then I started to rewrite. I actually sold it before a strike. We were in the middle of a strike, so I couldn't rewrite it. But one day, a big food basket from Goober Peters showed up at my front door, and I called my agent and said, "What's this about?" And he said, "Stallone has decided to do your film." And that was the progression of it. And after the strike, then I started writing it. And I guess that was probably 88, because I think the strike was in 88. So then I started writing. When I turned in the first draft, they really liked it, obviously. And then I rewrote it, and then they put Andrey Konchalovskiy on it, which was an interesting choice, but he had done Runaway Train. So pretty gritty guy, really. and very erudite, really good guy, talented. And he was in Paris. So this is a real Hollywood story. They flew me out to Paris. He's directing Ibsen at the Molière Theater. So I go to the Molière Theater. I'm totally hungover. I'm spending Warner's money like crazy. So I'm staying at the Plaza Athénée in Paris. I'm doing everything first class I can do. I'm taking first class flights and everything because I've been advised by my father also, go first class if they're paying. So, and Andrey was pretty savvy to this too. So he immediately said, let's go to the dining room at the Plaza Athénée and we'll have dinner. I'm totally hungover. I've taken the overnight flight and we have a nice dinner there and we talk about the script and he has 2 desserts because he has quite a sweet tooth. I'm totally exhausted, but we talk about the script and now I'm going to do Andrey's rewrite. So I go back to Hollywood and I've started to do Andrey's rewrite. I finish it up. And basically when I finish it up, studio doesn't love it. Andrey comes, he tries to defend it, but he gets knocked back because he's not got the status of a really strong director in Hollywood. It's not like so he fights for it a little, but he gets knocked back a little. Now the studio calls me and says, and it's Mark Canton, says, we're going to do John's draft. John gives me a draft. I write John's draft. The studio wants me to write their draft. Ultimately, every time I write an ending, it gets changed because somebody wants a new ending. Okay. And somebody wants a new this and that. So I'm basically writing script a week and I'm coming back with it and somebody new pops in, right? Or likes something or doesn't like something. So I wrote basically a draft for John, but then I finally get to rehearsals. Now you got to write Stallone's draft. So I'm sitting in rehearsals and Stallone's there. We're up at Stallone's house, which he's renting from Kirk Kerkorian, which is way up in the canyon, off of Benedict Canyon. And Kurt comes in, we're sitting around the table, we're doing rehearsals and Stallone's got his own ideas and he's great. He's a smart guy. I had no problem with him. Kurt comes in and I'm looking at him, I said, geez, you're a perfect character for Cash. But I didn't realize he was already in wardrobe and in character. And that's why he looked like Cash, because I didn't even realize he had already gone to wardrobe and was already coming to the rehearsals in character. He wasn't in character, but he was in character. So anyway, so we're doing this stuff and we're going over it line by line. And Stallone would send me away and I try to rewrite it the way he wanted it. And ultimately, when they got to the set and this was a scene he had approved and wanted and whatever, he'd spend 2 or 3 hours in the trailer rewriting it still, and then come out and everybody wait for him to come out. And he'd come out and he would shoot it. He'd shoot the way he wanted to shoot it. A lot of the dialogue attributed to me is not my dialogue. Some of the story that's in there is certainly not my story. Yeah. But when people say, gee, I saw Tango Cash, you wrote Tango Cash, I say, I got the credit. I don't think it's a big enough film to be legendary in the stories. Andrey had a very tough time. I went down to the set. His DP was fired, just to give you some context. I went down to the set in the second week because John wanted a scene where Kurt put on a dress. And I said, I don't really want to write that. I don't find that humor very funny. It just doesn't work for me. I'm not good for that. So I went down to the set and I asked Kurt. Kurt said to me, I've done some stupid things, but never on purpose. I don't see the point of being in a dress. He says, this isn't Some Like It Hot. It doesn't make sense to me. Ultimately, he got into the dress. They talked him into it, whatever. And ultimately, the scene doesn't really bother me. I'm just probably not the right guy to write it. A guy named Jeffrey Boehm ended up writing that scene for them in a production rewrite. So I went down there, but as a side note, the DP had been fired. And when I went down to the set, it was downtown in LA. And he seemed to be the happiest guy on the set. He had already been fired and knew he was leaving. That DP was Barry Sonnenfeld. And he was fired. Stallone didn't like the way he was making him look. And Don Thoren, who was a good journeyman guy and had worked with Stallone before, was put on the picture. Once you fire the director's DP, you sort of partially have emasculated him. Andrey kept up. And the guy who was a second unit director on Batman, Peter MacDonald, came on. And they had 2 separate sets going at one, where Peter MacDonald even was directing the principal. And Andrey got quite upset about that and called in the Directors Guild, and there was a big kerfuffle over it. So it was a difficult production. I was finally left after about 3 weeks into production. I was just freaking exhausted. And they said, well, they replaced me. They took mercy on me or replaced me because I wasn't going to leave. And nobody can leave these productions. Larry Franco felt the same way. It was a tough production. You can't leave a Hollywood picture. That's not a good rep for you. You know what I mean? So you got to stick it out. And I stuck it out until finally I had enough. I ran out of energy and there was enough stuff I wouldn't write. Change, not because so moral. It's just, I just didn't think I was the right person to write some of the stuff they were asking. And ultimately they made those changes. And like I said, Stallone rewrote a good deal of the dialogue.
I can't even imagine those strong personalities, John Peters, Sylvester Stallone. Were they good with each other or were they going at it?
They didn't go at it much. John, pretty respectful of Stallone, and John is actually fairly respectful of talent generally. Where he gets in trouble is with business side guys he feels are not creative. He's a very creative guy. He's got very good taste in a way, but he also has very sort of commercial comic book taste. So sometimes the tones get mixed a little. He wanted at the very beginning, he had this notion of a motorcycle with Gatling guns on the side that are in the finale and attack the bad guy's castle, whatever version that was. This is something he fixated on. I think you've heard about his mechanical spider thing. He fixates on this sort of hardware. Do you know what I mean? And it's not appropriate for all films, obviously. But one thing about John is when he says something, he believes it. He believes in what he says. He very firmly believes it, and he'll argue with you, but he's somewhat unreasonable because you can have a conversation with him that is both, you motherfucker, do what I want, or fucking work in this town again, and I love you, we're partners, why would you do that? In the same sentence. He didn't really have any conflict that I know of with the cast, and he's been very good at romancing talent. He got Jack Nicholson to be the Joker in the first Batman, which he produced. I was there in the room when he called him. He was like in some ranch in Colorado. He said, Jack, you got to do it. It's going to be great. You're going to play the Joker. You're going to make more money than you ever made in your life. And it turned out to be true. And I thought, I'm sitting there, I said, Jack Nicholson's not playing the Joker. Are you kidding me? He doesn't do that. Shows you what I know, right?
I forgot. That was the same year. That just came out a few months before Tango and Cash.
That's why Peter MacDonald moved from that movie to Tango and Cash. When I was writing it early, they were planning Batman. And I will say to John's credit too, and he showed me the ad campaign for Batman has no image of Batman or anything, just the logo was his idea. And he said, they want to put Batman on the thing. He said, you don't need Batman. Just put this logo out there. They'll know. And he was right. And the marketing guys came to him and they wanted to put Batman and they wanted to do an old time poster with the logo. He said, you don't need it. And he was right. He wasn't wrong about a lot of stuff, but many people, if you ask them, they'll tell you he's a difficult guy. I got along with him okay. I remember Stacey Snyder came to me one time and said, I don't get it, but you seem to be the only one that can speak John's language. I said, no. She say so. I don't know why. And I think it's because he did have respect for talent and not to say that I'm terribly talented, but the talent side. Anyway, so we went along and I left and they made the film and it was generally reviled, but people liked it.
I've read a lot of rumors about the movie and I was hoping you may or may not know since you weren't there all the way through, but if I throw some things at you and you can tell me if or true, false, or you just don't know. First off, I heard Jack Palance very excited to work with Sylvester Stallone, and then all of his scenes got cut out.
The Jack Palance scenes, he didn't have any scenes with Stallone directly except for at the end. And I will say, I'm happy to tell you that I have nothing to do with the rat maze scene. I went with my agent, and it wasn't really a premiere because I think people were, to some extent, the studios soured on it, on whatever, but there was a sort of an opening day where we all went and saw the movie at the Chinese Groman. I think it was called the Chinese Groman back then. It's now the Groman, whatever it is, Groman Theater in Hollywood. And I'm sitting there and they open the scene and they're on this highway and he takes a shot at this truck and the guy with the big jaw comes out and I'm looking at it and I'm saying to him, I turned to my agent and I said, who wrote this? Because this had nothing to do with anything I had wrote for the opening or written. And it turned out that, and I guess you know, what's the name of the director who took over for the last 2 weeks? Magnoli had come in and directed it. there was that, and there were numbers of things in there. I don't think, from the scripts I know and the scripts I wrote, Palance never had any scene. He didn't appear in the laundry room scene in my thing, where he comes out of the shadows and for some reason is in a prison laundry room. These are not things that I had in there. So if that's the case, I don't know about it. I don't believe that those scenes were cut out. I think he had more scenes than my script and probably the same number of scenes that was written in the extra scenes for him. And that would be my guess, but I'm only speculating.
I also heard that Brian James's role was severely increased after Stallone really liked him, his character, and his Cockney accent.
He was a character that was, called the Queen, and he put on a weird Cockney accent, which I don't know where that came from. And those scenes are dead equivalent to what's in the script. So I don't think he had any extra scenes. I don't believe he was written in anymore. I'd have to look at the film exactly, but those were the scenes. And the torture scene with the hand grenade, that was from my script. It took place in a home inside. It didn't take place on a rooftop, and they didn't threaten to throw off the roof. That's a little embellishment from Stallone, but I don't think he has that many. Does he have extra scenes? Does he have that many scenes? Does he appear again in the film?
I just read that he had a very small role in there, and then that he eventually, they wrote more for him, is what the rumor is, what I heard.
I don't believe that's true. I'd have to look at the film to see what scene. Those were the scenes I wrote. That was his big scene. You see him at the beginning, and they follow him at the beginning, and he's one of their lead into the ambush, and then he's on the questioning scene, and that's what he was in the film. I don't think he's much more in the film, so I'm not following that.
He does come back at the end and do the same thing with the hand grenade to Terry Hatcher that was done to him, and they eventually drop that hand grenade down his pants and kick him down the stairs, and he explodes.
There you go. Okay, then that's an extra scene. That is an extra. I guess I should have looked at the movie before we. I haven't seen it for a while, and there are several scenes in there that I didn't write, so I'm not that familiar with it. But if they coup de grace him at the end, I did not do that, no.
And then they, of course, have to have the pithy comment afterwards, very surf's up, pal, like those kind of like little one-liners at the end. Did you write all of those?
I wrote a lot of them. I wrote a lot of those lines. I didn't write the one for that because I didn't write the scene. But yeah, Stallone has his own sense of humor, which is a bit different than mine. But again, my humor basically was predicated on the fact that they were in constant competition. The stuff that about like I said, the one-upsmanship, that's what I felt drove it. And the spirit of that and the tone of that is what really remains in the film from my point of view. The story is essentially, the bones of the story are essentially the same. I ended up getting solo credit on it. I have to take responsibility for the majority of what's written up there, and yet dialogue was changed and certain things were changed. There was for example, the shower scene I wrote, and when a lot of that dialogue from the shower scene is my stuff, but the dick jokes and stuff are not. The bending over and stuff like that's not where I was going with it. That was added.
Ultimately, are you happy or slightly upset that you are sole credited on there? Because I know I spoke with Ed Solomon recently, and he is one of the few credited writers on Super Mario Brothers, and he's just like, now I take responsibility for this thing.
Yeah. Listen, at first in your career, I was upset. As I grow older and mellower, people seem to like it. And first of all, there's a money benefit to being the only credited writer. So I appreciate that. You get residuals, and if you don't have to share them with anybody, that's really good. So I appreciate that part of it. I took it harder earlier, and when I was a younger writer. Now that I've mellowed, I've moved on and can look at it with a little more perspective and understand that's the movie making process, and that's what I signed up for. And since then, I think, starting in the mid-90s, I've done much more soulful work and much more personal work, and decided to get out of that world. I left that world as that world started to leave me. And so I've been doing other things that I feel much closer to. And I don't really take it that seriously. But when I speak to somebody like you, I do like to throw in some disclaimers just to protect my own reputation as a grown-up.
You definitely share a lot of credit on the next credited screenplay that you're on, which is Nowhere to Run. What a weird mix of people. Joe Esterhazy and Richard Marquand. I never would have put those two together ever.
Yes. It's an interesting situation. There was a script. I had an overall deal at Columbia, so they'd call me in for consultation once in a while. And there was a Marquand and Esterhazy script. And basically it's Shane, if you look at the script. And it's a updated version of that. And they had a deal with Jean-Claude. And they called me in because Esterhazy is a guy who's a one draft guy. He gives you his draft. I don't know if you know about his reputation as this, but he gives you his draft and then they ask him to rewrite and he basically comes up with the same draft. Listen, I understand. I'm not knocking him. He's a smart guy and a terrific writer, but he come back with the same draft and basically became uncooperative and didn't want to do any more draft. Producer came to me and said, we couldn't shoot at a vineyard, okay? And we asked him to change vineyard to ranch and he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't change the word vineyard to, it wouldn't make any difference, but he wouldn't do it. This is what he wanted. That was his story. I'm not sure that's accurate, but in any event. So Van Damme had a different notion of who he wanted to be. They came to me and said, we're doing this movie and with Van Damme, and he's going to, at the end of the movie, he wants to think his way out of it. He's not going to fight his way out of the situation. Okay? This is the producer talking to me. He said, this is what Jean-Claude Van Damme wants. And they said, could you write the end? Because the end wasn't really, it wasn't right for them. I forget exactly what it was, but it didn't quite work out. And I said, look, you can say anything you want. Van Damme is going to fight his way out at the end. Okay? That's what's going to happen. Okay. You guys can believe it. And the director doesn't want him to fight his way out. And the studio wanted him, I think, but the director doesn't. We want to figure out how not to fight his way out. And I said, he's going to fight his way out. So they said, okay. And I didn't get the job. So they brought in a friend who's actually became good friends with me after this process. They brought in a friend of mine called Les Boheme. Okay. And Les came in and he was a friend of Robert Harmon. They used to jam in a band together. And Robert is a very nice guy, a very mild guy. And they tried to figure out how to do this. And it just didn't work. And they came back to me. They said, will you write the ending? Because Jean-Claude's going to fight his way out at the end. But he's not going to use karate or any martial arts. He wants to do it without using karate or martial arts. I said, fine. Okay. We'll do it that way. I came in and I wrote the last act, basically wrote the last act of that, the last action. And then the Nowhere to Run. And then they brought in a couple of guys to punch it up, to put in line. That's how that happened. So me and Les and Esterhazy, who did the original script, were the ones who were credited with it. Ultimately, we got together and all agreed that we could all three share credit. And that's how that happened. And I think that the movie came out okay. Like I said, it's Shane, a version of Shane. And it's all right.
I am actually a pretty big fan of the film Metro. I've seen that actually probably 3 or 4 times over the years.
There's another sad story. I hate to bring these up like this, but it's another Hollywood story. I'll trash a couple people in this. They'll never hear it, right? When I was over at Columbia, I wrote this, I had the script in 1991, and I talked to a SWAT guy who became a good friend of mine, who worked with the script. People ask me, how long does it take to write a script? And this is the story I tell them. He said, how long does it take to write a script? I did research in 1991. I thought of the idea. Finally, in 1995, I wrote the script in about, I would say, 10 weeks. Now, it either took me 5 years or 10 weeks. It took me both. Okay. So it took me both of those things. So I wrote this as a spec script, and I had just finished a script over at Joe Roth's company, Caravan, with Roger Birnbaum, who now is reappearing in another cameo role. And it was a horror script called The Disciple. And we had gone through a number of machinations, and I had Jan de Bont as director on it. And again, Schwarzenegger appears, and we went and talked to him, and he was going to do it, but he pulled out. It was a real magnet for talent. I also got Ridley Scott ultimately took it over to direct it, and I rewritten out of that. So I had a relationship over there, and I wrote this script and I slipped it to them, and they really liked it. and they bought it for a lot of money. And I went in and I talked to, and I guess it was a couple of months later, CA gave it to Eddie Murphy, so Eddie Murphy wanted to do it. And over at Caravan, they decided that they would put a guy named Thomas Carter on it. Are you familiar with Thomas Carter? His work?
Yeah, actually, I just watched Coach Carter for the first time the other day.
Thomas Carter would put on. So I had a 45-minute meeting with Thomas Carter, and he told me what he wanted to do or had notions, and I didn't think he really got it, to tell you the truth, at all. This was basically a buddy comedy coming off of Nutty Professor, which was Eddie's biggest film in years, okay? I went home, and then I got a call from Riley Ellis, who's the executive on the film. And she said, Thomas doesn't think you can do the rewrite. And I said, what? And she said, yeah, he just doesn't think it's going to work. And I said, listen, Riley, you bought this a lot of money. Eddie Murphy said he wants to do this script. And I'm telling you, you're making a huge mistake, and you're going to call me back 2 weeks before production and ask me to rewrite the script. And she said, I know, it's this and this and this and that. But anyways, again, Jeffrey Boehm makes another appearance. Jeffrey rewrote the script, putting notes I had never seen from a writer in it, at the direction of Thomas, saying, okay, I don't know why Eddie doesn't call ahead and know this isn't going on, but I'm putting this down anyway. He writes a scene that he's saying, this scene doesn't make any sense because he puts in parentheses. I'm not sure why, but anyway. So anyway, I said, yeah, they'd call me to rewrite it in 2 weeks. I was off by a week. They called me a week before production and said, you got to rewrite it. You got to come out to San Francisco. And Joe Roth, he said to Roger Berg, you got to go up to San Francisco. You got to rescue us. You got to rewrite this. And will you do it? Will you come up? And I said, sure, I'll do it. And so I flew up with Roger to San Francisco, and he's cursing all the way up there, saying, I don't know, I shouldn't have let him rewrite it and this and that. And I get up there, and we have a meeting, and Eddie has said, basically, I signed on to do, the Randy Feldman script. I didn't sign on to do the script. They were afraid he's going to pull out of the movie. And they had already staged this movie up in San Francisco. So I get there, and we have the pre-meeting, which you always have before you meet the big stars, because they don't want you to say anything stupid. They want to make sure they know what's going to be said. And I sat there with Thomas Carter, and I said, Thomas, what do you think this movie is? And he says, because I think it's a buddy comedy. He says, I think it's a cop drama. And I turned to Roger and I said, you got to fire this guy now. He said, quick. I said, fire him. We'll find somebody. Just fire him. Eddie's not attached to him necessarily. And they didn't. And I tried to rewrite with the guy, and he was very difficult guy to deal with. And I finally went into Roger's office. I was up there, and I went into Roger's office and said, look, I'm going to go home because I can't stay in a room with this dude. I'm going to go home, and I will fax you. This is the time of fax back then. I'll do the pages. I'll fax you the pages. I'll do the change. But yeah, so we decided to take it back to my original script. Basically, they threw out Jeffrey Boehm's script, which was this TV melodrama script that didn't even make sense. Went back to my script for the most part. And I sent in pages, rewrote it. Ultimately, I left. They put on the Thomas brothers, and I heard a funny story about them. They went up there with Thomas Carter and stayed with him for a weekend and said, hey, we want to leave. We'll give you the money back. We just want to get out of here. So there was a lot of acrimony. I wasn't on the set, but Rappaport at the beginning of it loved the guy, just loved him. I'm hearing a lot of dirty laundry here, right? I just loved Thomas Carter, and I saw them get together, and he just wanted to be his buddy. Oh, they were tooth and nail. By the end, they were at huge odds. Eddie said to me later, yeah, the director is the one who messed that one up. And it just became a weird kind of cop melodrama that didn't really, he felt there had to be like a TV through line to it. And that's not wasn't the structure of the script at all. He took out the comedy from it. He took out a lot of the feeling from it. You can see that it's a bit different than the tone of my usual writing. That's what happened with that. And that could have been a really good franchise, but it turned out to be a big disappointment to me in terms of just being, to my way of thinking, a flat movie, a flat version of that, when it could have been a very fun partnership and really highlighted what Eddie's good at. And I think he tried to breathe as much life as he could into it, but kept being dragged down by Thomas, who just wanted this kind of melodrama. And at the end, they literally put the female lead on a sawmill, don't they? It's something. Hey, I talked to the guy who was the production guy and who was the executive producer. He said, well, at least she wasn't tied to the railroad tracks. That's how far back we were going. The ending was totally weird, and I did not, again, write that ending that way.
What are you doing now?
I'm doing a couple of things. I'd like to direct you to a film I wrote and directed called Know Your Enemy. That's about, and I guess it's there's a movie now out about road rage incident. It's about a road rage incident where a guy takes over this young affluent couple's house, and the dialectic. I made it as a very small, personal, independent film. My son was director of photography on it, and he's a DP who worked with Janusz Kaminski for a couple of years, and now is out on his own doing well. And so we made this film, and it's dialectic, social commentary, and look for it at a Tubi or at some platform near you. And in the last 10 years, I've done so different things. I've written a couple novels. I've written a couple plays. A couple of the plays I wrote were made into movies. There was one called As Luck Would Have It that I tried to get made as a movie here. Ironically, got made as a movie in Spain. It's with Selma Hayek in it, which is odd as a Spanish-speaking movie, but it's a very interesting movie. And right now, what I'm doing and is occupying all of my attention is I wrote a book called The Murder of Sherlock Holmes, a novel, and I wrote it under a pen name, David Fable. Don't ask me why I did that. I just felt like I wanted to change my identity. It is literally about the murder of Sherlock Holmes and how Watson teams up with Mrs. Hudson, his landlady's son, who I invented, a 21-year-old son, to solve the murder of Sherlock Holmes and take the Holmes-Watson tradition forward. And so he becomes partners. This 21-year-old Oxford graduate kid becomes partners with Watson, and they solve these murders. And I have attached Alan Leach to play one of the roles, which is a really juicy role. He's my partner in it. So right now it's out to a number of English production companies to be a miniseries, 6-part miniseries. But it's a very fun novel, and it's a using the Conan Doyle universe and taking it forward about 20 years, so that like Wiggins, who was head of the Irregulars, is now a major crime lord on the East End, right? He's now the head crime lord, and Moriarty is in a cell underneath Bedlam Hospital in the mental ward. It's really fun, and I really enjoy it, and I think it would be very entertaining. So that's what I've been doing lately. I'm getting back into the swing of the business, but I was doing a lot of personal work for the last 10 years. And the business I was in of selling spec strips didn't become as obsolete, like I would say, as buggy whips, but it became pretty close, given the fact that all the IP is comic books. And it's very difficult to originate an idea nowadays in this market.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I imagine that it has to be. And especially if you talked about it's going to be a TV series or limited series. That's really where so much is at right now. The business, has changed so much over the years. It used to be like TV was death, and now it's, oh no, this is the thing where you want to be.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it's a great structure because it allows you to really tell your story. It allows you to tell a story in the time and the pace you want. And what I love about it, and HBO and all these shows that do, I worked in TV, producing TV for a year, which was a strange experience for me, good and bad in certain ways. But we did 44 minutes and 45 seconds, and that's what we had in 4 acts. Now you can have a Sopranos episode that was an hour and 5 minutes. You can have one that was 52 minutes. You can have a episode of Breaking Bad that's like Breaking Bad, which I think is like one of the greatest things I've ever seen. I love Breaking Bad, and obviously love The Sopranos like everybody else. And that is really empowering. And so I'd love to get into that area, and I've never had the opportunity. I've written Movie of the Week, and I've written features and produced TV, but this new form is very freeing and very attractive. So I'm trying to see if I can place one of those.
Thank you so much again for your time today. This has been truly a pleasure speaking with you.
Oh, no problem. I'm happy to do it. And I hope I don't make too many enemies.
how did you get involved in show business?
I was working in Fleet Street for an Australian newspaper, and it was miserable. It was really because none of the Australians wanted to be in England in the 50s, and they were quite nasty. And a friend of mine worked there, Mike Roberts, and he saw an advert in, read all the newspapers and editor, and there was one of the showbiz thing had that Pearl and Dean were opening up Pearl and Dean were an advertising company, and a big one at the time, were opening up a studio at Southall International Film Studio, because commercial TV was about to start. So they wanted to have a studio with, I think we had 3 stages instead of working in little tiny basements in London. I wrote to a man called Byron Lloyd, who was the managing director. And next thing I know, I got a meeting, and Byron was a very dapper man, and I was quite scruffy. And I remember sitting there and I heard his voice talking, and it was me. I was lying through my teeth about how much I loved the film industry, how my whole life revolved around cameras. I didn't even have a fucking Brownie camera at the time, if I remember. Anyway, I must have been a very good liar, because I convinced him. And just over a week later, I walked onto the film stage for my first introduction to film. And it sounds a bit corny, but I knew I was home. It's something, leaving outside Southall, miserable, rainy day, walking through these doors into this kind of lit area where everything was warm, advertising, something like Heinz ketchup or some stupid thing. And I thought, I love this. And that was it. I knew that I'd found what I wanted. And although I knew nothing about cameras, I'm the least technical person you're ever going to meet, I conned my way through things and worked there for about nine months. And then I moved on to TV series, Robin Hood and Lancelot at Walton Studios, which was a great learning, because they made one a week, so you just churn it out. That was a clapperable advert, so a lot to learn. And that was it. I just knew that I found what I wanted in life. And I had a kind of hero, Desmond Davis, who was a camera operator and eventually became a very good director. And I just liked something about him, the way he always seemed to control the whole floor, and his ideas were great. And I thought, this is a man to watch. You know, he's, because most people then, and even up to the point now, do just what's enough. You know, they never do anything extra, play it safe. And I was told that by many people, don't volunteer things. You know? Whereas Des did, he really, if he was a weak director, he didn't matter, because he would. So I thought, that's the person I want to follow. And the camera operating is the thing I would like to do. And over the years, it worked out. I hated being a camera assistant, what's called a focus puller, because I hate anything technical, as my wife will tell you. She mends the fuses. So I just fell into it, and I just knew that it was something that it was my lifetime. It was going to be my life. And it has been for another 60 or whatever it was. I don't like to think about the time, but probably over 60 years of working. And yeah, I've said this before, but I can honestly say I don't think I ever had a day when I was bored. And not many people can say that. I was never, every day was something happened or something exciting. You know, there's a challenge that you had to work out. You work with some horrible arsehole actor that's being a real pain in the arse, like Oliver Reed, those type of people. And then you work with Ingrid Bergman and Laurence Olivier. And I thought to myself, I'm being paid to work with the greatest actors in the world, especially when I was just where I came from, with very poor education, and no one had any great expectations for you. And I just loved it, and still do. I miss it very much, I must admit.
It seems so odd to me that you say you're not technical, but then you're operating a camera. I would think that would be very technical.
Not really. No, it was technical, I meant that the cameras and lenses and all that shit. But the operated camera is, I just found it totally natural. I don't know if you see it, but the camera goes on a head, which you work by wheels, which a lot of people have trouble with. And I found it just very natural to do the movement. And I found it the more complex or more complicated the shot was, the more I enjoyed it. And I had a great crew for many years who had exactly the same attitude. My dolly crew, the one who moved the camera, loved it. He hated when it was static because there had nothing to do. But when we moved either big cranes or on a dolly, we all loved it. I learned quite early you mustn't do it to show off. A shot has to be because it should be, because the action takes you there or the acting takes you there. Whereas I met people that just love moving the camera for no reason, apart from like, aren't I clever? And I never, ever, I don't think I ever really did that. I always thought how it worked for the, and it's funny, you do some quite complicated shots with lots of moves. And everyone would go to see Russia the following day because they see the camera doing this. They come out disappointed. They said, but we didn't see the moves. And I said, well, that's the whole art of it. You're not supposed to, the camera's supposed to move without you, especially special times you do, but most times the camera moves with the action and with the acting. You're not supposed to point to the camera. You're supposed to be watching the action, the scene, and the actors. So when people came out disappointed, I knew we succeeded.
That's a pretty good goal, to disappoint them.
Yes. Yes.
How was it working with Milos Forman on Ragtime?
I'm trying to think, I kind of had second unit, second camera. So that was quite good fun. And I really, the thing that, I'll be very honest, it was because it was James Cagney. I thought the chance of working, I'd have done any, okay, I didn't care what the fucking film was. The fact that you're going to be there with Cagney, who was like way back in my life, he's always been there in the film. And he didn't disappoint at all. He was a wonderful, very humble man, very humble. A friend of mine was doing the publicity on it, and he wanted to shoot for a week or two interviews, and I wasn't doing anything then. And I said, I'll do it. He said, oh, no, we don't have your type of money. I said, I'm going to work with Cagney and all these people. I'm not thinking about the money. So we spent 2 weeks with O'Connor and Cagney and the others interviewing them. It was just a joy. Listen to these stories of how things were and how humble these type of people are. Some of them more modern actors are a real pain in the arse, prima donnas. But I found that old school were really humble. I think Cagney said, I never thought I was any more important than the carpenter or electrician. He said everyone had a job to do. Everyone tried to do it as well as they could. It was obviously true. He was just a humble man, very dedicated. And Donald O'Connor was lovely. Donald O'Connor had been to hell and back because of drink. And this was like a comeback for him. And I was interviewing him, and we're talking about Cagney, and Cagney's stiff-legged, that dance he used to do was very stiff-legged dance, like the Irish. And I noticed as I was talking to O'Connor, his legs started moving. And I said, would you rather, instead of talking about it, dance it? He said, well, yeah. He said, how can we do that? I said, we have this stage there, which they built for a big scene. And I said, I can get, within half an hour to an hour, I can get a small crew together, light it, get a camera track, and wherever you go, we'll follow you. So it was really marvelous. So I was kept pinching myself, thinking, is this really happening? You're working with these great people. We did wonderful sequences because he would describe how Astaire would do it, or how all the different dance, how Gene Kelly would, and he'd all the different dance, the same dance as they would do it. But it's a really wonderful experience. Because I always had not always, but I learned then to have a great respect for dancers. And after I was lucky enough to work with Rudolf Nureyev and Liza on Cabaret and Joel Grey. And so this was an early introduction to what I was going to do later. And was just a lovely experience.
And he was no spring chicken at that time, if memory serves.
Think about dancing. I've met a lot of them over the years. They keep very fit. Quite often you see them sitting there and the music starts, they're like low people, and the music starts and they're off. And as they stand up, they become almost like it's like a magic thing. They become a different person. I think they finish and sit down and go, and that was really lovely. The music seems to bring them back to their youth again. I can't dance 2 steps to save my life. I totally envy when I see these type of people dancing, or even normal people. I watch them dance, and as my wife will tell you, I think I danced twice with her in 15 years, and that's because I was very drunk. So I have great admiration for people that had that movement, and it's great.
I'm so curious, how did you get into the director's chair with Rambo 3?
I'd done Rambo 2, and George Cosmatos was the first unit director, and he, like I say, now he's no longer with us. He really wasn't a very good director, and I was doing all the action scenes, sometimes with Stallone, and Stallone liked what he was seeing and what we were doing. So that kind of, when the next one came up, the offer came with it. And then Tango and Cash, I've done all these different action. Well, I'm the least action-y type person you're ever going to meet. I have trouble crossing the road on my own, but it comes very natural to me to work out sequences and scenes. And I normally had quite a lot of, I've got respect coming back from the actors because they knew you knew what you were doing, but also I was always very conscious of danger. I've seen a few bad things happen, not when I was in charge. So I was determined. I'd be very careful, and I'd rehearse. And sometimes some of the younger ones, I wanted to be gung-ho. You have to pull them back because it happened after I'd finished on Harry Potter when the young stunt guy was bad and still a cripple, or will always be a cripple. And that was really because things hadn't been thought out too well, to be quite honest. And I like to think, had I been there, I'd have seen the danger before it happened and stopped it. But that's all too late. But I always have been, and always, I won't be working anymore, but it's still in other people. You know, because a guy's a stuntman, he's still got the same body, maybe a little bit fitter than us, but you throw them against the wall or under a car, they're going to get hurt. And you do everything you can to safeguard them. And they're majority of 90% of them are quite bright. You get their 10% that are really stupid. These are the ones you have to watch because they want to do things to impress, not really thinking about what the end result could be. Because you always think you are making a film. This is not war. This is not reality. You're making a film, and there's no earthly reason why anyone should be badly hurt.
You mentioned Tango and Cash. How did you get involved with that film?
I was doing the second unit. I'm trying to think really how it all started. I think the studio, I've been working with John Peters, and he wanted me to be on it. And then there was kind of 2 schools there. One was thinking they're making a kind of really deep thinking film, and the studio Konchalovskiy wanted this very deep thinking on its own type of action film, but really very intelligent. Studio wanted action. Floyd, Stallone, all these people, at vast expense. So there was a kind of early, almost the first few days, the conflict was there between what the studio wanted and what Andrey wanted. And of course, it's very few directors that couldn't be, if the studio wants something, you might as well say, okay, or leave, because you're not going to beat them. And so what it was decided on that I would have my own full-size crew. I would shoot 90% of the action, and they would shoot the dialogue and the romance. And it worked quite well. There was a few bad days, but Andrey, to be quite honest, is a fairly lazy man. and he didn't seem to mind that he wasn't doing all the work. I'd have gone crazy had it been the opposite way round, but it didn't seem to worry him too much. And obviously he was getting hugely well paid for what he did, or what he didn't do, to be quite honest.
So eventually does he leave or does he get fired off of that film?
Yeah, I think, but much too late. I'm trying to remember now how it was. Yeah, I remember I think it was a Saturday morning. I was in the hotel because we were doing a 5-day week. And I must have had a little bit of a hangover, and the phone went, and it was John Peters. And he said, "The commie bastard is history." So I said, you mean you sacked Andrey? Yeah, that commie bastard's history. I said, but you've only got 2 weeks to go. We shot for 14 weeks with him. And they said, "No, we got Bob." I think Bob. I said, "Bob who?" Oh, he said, "I can't remember his second name, but he's very good." I said, what has he done? He said he did a kind of trailer for Batman. I remember. And I said, "Does that mean he's ready for this?" "Oh, it'll be okay." And of course, it wasn't okay. But luckily, my assistant, Steve Hardin, and I had already scheduled the rest of the film and taken all the difficult action stuff for ourselves, given, which at that time was going to be Konchalovskiy, but then became whatever his name was, gave him that. So it was hard to screw up. But I don't think it could happen nowadays. It happened then because you had characters like John Peters, but I don't think now the studio would actually put up with that. And they shouldn't put up with it, to be quite honest.
You're directing second unit, but your second unit is almost doing the first unit's work. Is that right?
Not almost, was doing it. Yes, it was. Yeah.
Was doing it. Wow. Okay. Because I've read that you were basically one of the 3 directors on the film, but you're just not credited as such.
Yeah. Oh no, I think I got the usual second unit credit. I think I got it anyway. I never really take much notice of credit. I loved it because I did most of the stuff with Kurt Russell, who was a delight. And when I think about it now, obviously I'm not working now, but I still feel quite privileged that you were given this work to do, trusted with a vast amount of money, basically, and not really questioned, which always amazed me. People didn't say, "But why are you doing this? Why are you asking for that?" I think most of us was because John Peters told the studio or told the financial people, whatever Peter wants, give him. I didn't know that at the time, but I found out afterwards. I remember talking to one of the production people a year or so later, and I said, "I'm having trouble getting anything now." I said, "Tango?" Yeah, he said, "No." He said, because John Peters said, I said, "If the kid wants it, give it to him." The kid, I was a kid. Not anymore. Interesting days, and it was, and Sony had just taken over Columbia TriStar, so there's all that Japanese money there, and they built this big old MGM studio. So there's a huge amount of money that was being spent in those days, and they made several films that were a couple with Arnold Schwarzenegger. They hadn't really. I think the feeling was you get a big name, and that's all you have to worry about. And of course, you need a good story almost before you have the good big name. And I think it was quite a disaster the first year or so. Cost the Sony a lot of money.
Now, I know you had, done some work on Rambo 2, and then you direct Rambo 3. So what's your relationship like with Sylvester Stallone at this time?
It's hard to know with people like Sly. I think when you're useful to them, which you're a commodity, basically. And as he knew me from Rambo 2, so he knew I was capable. And then when we did 3, when I took over in 3, I said, "We're making the same film again and again." They said, "What do you mean?" I said, "There's no humor in it. Everyone knows you're going to survive." And so we tried to make it, do some rewrites and get a bit of a humor into it. So it wasn't quite as, the films after that, fun enough, he did that a couple of times. So we tried to pull it off. I don't think we really did, because the studio, people want Rambo. They want Rambo. You have to train them slowly to accept that you get some humor and intelligence into it.
I think the next thing you directed after Tango and Cash was Mo Money. How was that for you?
A big surprise. This is because I was under contract, not for a great deal of money, I must admit, but I wasn't working. I took over a couple of secrets on films that were out of control and that kind of thing, but that wasn't what I wanted. So I said to John Peters, yeah, I'm not happy. I'll finish whatever time I have left and move on. So he didn't want that. So they said, oh, no, we've got the perfect film for you with the Wayans brothers. I never knew the Wayans brothers had never been broadcast in England, so they were totally unknown to us. And it wasn't a program that was called Living Colour, the one they did on TV. And it wasn't a program, to be quite, I would have watched anyway. Anyway, they said, I want you to meet Damon and we want you to direct this film. So they said, go to the NBC, you've done TV thing, go to NBC and meet him. So I said, what's he look like? I have no idea who this man was. He said, well, he's 6'3" and he's black. So I go to the studio, looking around and they were doing this Living Colour. So there must be 10 people that were 6'3" and obviously all black. And I kept standing in front of them. Oh, the fuck, walking by me. And eventually I found Damon, who's quite a serious person. He's trying to think of the word. But anyway, I had a meeting with him and I said, look, the studio want me to do this. I'll be honest with you, I'm not the person to do it. I've got no idea what you're all about, what your humor is about. I brought up on the Goon Show and Peter Sellers, all this type of humor in England, and I don't find that humor very funny. So I just thought, out of politeness, I tell you that thank you for the offer, but no. Damon doesn't talk too much, and he looked at me, okay. So I went back to my office. I thought, phew, that's good. And my producer came in, said, oh, that went well, Peter. I said, what? He said, he loves you. I said, what do you mean? He said, Damon loves you and is insisting if the film's going to be made, you're directing it. I said, but he said, no, he said, you were so honest with him. So it totally backfired on me. I had the agreement that I can have a rewrite and that, because none of those, you have a kind of a rough rewrite. And that's all I said. They know what their audience wants more than I do. So there's no going to be fighting. All I can do is just make the film the best I can, not go over schedule, not go over budget, and just keep it going, which we did. And it turned out to be a fairly successful film. Yeah, there was a few, as like any films, a few bad days, but overall it worked okay. And it certainly made their money back, which is, of course, the only thing the studio really cares about, and understandably.
You've worked for so long and have done so many different roles over the years with camera operator, DP, director. What are some of your favorite memories?
Oh, I think my favorite experience was working on Cabaret with Bob Fosse, who was my hero. I just thought he was a wonderful director, great choreographer, wonderful, also a great guy, a real fun person to be with. And also I admired the fact that Cy Fure and the producers hated what we were doing. They said this film is unreleasable. We weren't even about to, they said we'd be lucky to get it in-flight movies, which is the biggest insult you can make at a time to and they did all they could to put Bob down. It was really awful. Whereas the crew, like Jeff Huntworth, the cameraman, and myself, and the AD, we all thought this is making a good product, but they didn't. And then when the Oscars came up and all that, and I think Cabaret got 8 or 9 Oscars. No, even then, and the lucky thing, it didn't get it for the best film. So the producers, Bobby got it, Jeff Huntworth got it, the editor got it, but the producers didn't get it because it didn't get the best film. I think Godfather or something like that got it. But I remember Jeff went to the premiere, Jeff Huntworth, and they were all there, the producers, and no one came up and said, got to say, we were wrong. You were right, all of you. you were making not a good film, but a great film. They were still angry. Yet it was number one, 8 Oscars. People talked about it for many. It was used as an example of how to push a musical with a story, which doesn't happen. They often have a rough little story, but the cabaret was very strong. And also you had the start of the Nazi regime in the mid-30s, so you had a historic basis as well as. So, to me, it was a wonderful experience to work with Bob and Joel Grey and Liza, Michael York, who never gets enough credit because Michael was first he was a charming man, and I never seemed to get the credit that he deserved.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love his role in that. And I got to see that one projected on the big screen just a few months ago, and that was so great to see again.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's yes, because you so seldom see it. Now, I've seen it 2 or 3 times on really big screen, and it really looks fantastic still.
It's got to be so interesting for you to watch a movie that you've had a hand in. You've got so many stories that probably every time you see an image, you're like, oh, I remember that day. And, oh, this is what we had trouble with, or we really pulled this off.
Yeah. In spite of sometimes. Yeah. Being told this, especially with Cy-Fure and Co, we could never release this film. It's unreleasable. And the terrible thing is even though you don't believe them, it puts a seed of doubt in your head. Now, I'm a camera operator at the time. I had some influence, not a great deal. But so I watch Bob Fosse sometimes, and he'd be like that. He's always like that anyway. When they made the film of his life, what was the actor? He got him off to a T. Bob was always crouched, hunched forward. He didn't have the strength to stand up. And of course, then he'd get up and do the whole dance. He showed Liza the whole dance. And he'd sit down again with his cigarette and just look like an old man again. But no, I had a huge admiration, and as I got older and took on more responsibility, and had that kind of experience when instead of producers helping you, they're sabotaging you. What the fuck are you doing? Because we're all here to make the best film possible, and if the film is really successful, you people like myself, we get paid, and that's it. But you're going to reap money for sometimes decades from a successful film. It was an interesting experience, and I learned a lot then, the way Bobby used to handle it. I know you could see at times he was destroyed, and he was on a little bit on drugs, not really heavy duty drugs, but was it Benzodrine or something? He was on, which he admits to, and it's in the film of his life, because I used to see him lack. Sometimes he'd start run out of energy, and then he'd come back 15 minutes later, and his arms and legs went all over the place. So you realise that whatever he was taking worked, and it wasn't really heavy. It wasn't like injections, like that, but no, I had a huge respect for Bobby, and also Liza. Joel Grey, I think, was unbelievable. Michael York was superb. Never gets enough acclaim for what he did, and it looks good. The photograph, the art direction was great. Editing was good, and the music was Ralph Burns. They did great orchestrations. All in all, they got a really good team together, and the end result was there.
What else are you working on these days?
My wife and I, we go to cinema quite a lot. I love, even now, at the ripe old age of 80, whatever, I still, when the lights go down the cinema, my little heart still beats a bit faster. I just could use, as a kid, I was born just before the war, 1939, so there's no TV there. So cinema was the great adventure. And even now, to me, I say when I sit there and the lights go down and the screen lights up, I get a kick. But it's not a very good film. I still love it.
He has a lot of people that he reads their scripts. He acts as an executive producer. He is guiding people through making, like first-time filmmakers. He's helping them make their films.
So I'm a very busy. I'm a very nice. I help a lot of people.
We got 2 Life Achievement Awards in Italy, and we're going to Japan. He's busy all the time helping other people make films.
My lifetime achievement of all. I had this woman. No, we got that in, was it Venice?
Taormina.
Yeah. Anyway, that's quite a nice experience.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's so nice that you're giving back to the younger filmmakers, too.
I had not a lot, but quite a bit of help when I was young. And there was two types of people in it. The people that wanted you, helped you, and the people who really wanted you to fail. And a few of those. So when I got a little bit of power myself, and I saw someone that I knew was talented, I did all I could to help them, but never take over. I think that's the important thing. A few times that young tried to say, "Oh, will you be on the film with me?" I said no, because you can't have two. No one knew, are they looking at you or me? You are the director. So I've done a few things when you talk things through with a younger director before they start filming, and they walk away, because it's really up to the director to put his stamp, his personality on the film. And also, you never want a confusion of, because actors are very insecure people, and if they don't know who to look at for the advice, who's making the decision, it's normally a disaster.
Mr. MacDonald, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such a pleasure talking with you.
Oh, great. I must say I enjoyed it. It brings back lots of memories for me, which is good. Makes me feel I'm still wanted.
All right, we are back, and we were talking about Tango and Cash, and I'm surprised that there wasn't more discussion with the screenwriter and I guess he was second unit, but eventually ended up directing a lot of it. But I can see Sylvester Stallone just really taking over this movie, and has done that with other projects in the past, especially something that's going astray so much, because I think the guy's super talented, great writer, and pretty good director sometimes, but just he's not going to let something go astray so much. So I don't know how he let this happen. If John Peters was so powerful that even Stallone couldn't save this, not to say that Stallone necessarily can save that many movies. I'm not the biggest Cobra fan in the world, but I know a lot of people are.
Yeah, I had read that he was directing by the end of this movie. Stallone, that is. So who knows? And this also might have just been something where, because I know they ran into release date timing issues, right? They had to do the wet print and everything with the release, even with reshoots, and it was getting so expensive. I think the listed budget was like $54 million, but it has to be much higher than that if that's what leaked. So I would just have to imagine he was involved, and then you got to think at a certain point you can't resuscitate the body, if that makes sense. Or you've just been so involved in it, you're like, this is pretty good. Like, you look at it, it's like that scene in 30 Rock I love so much, where Jack's trying to come up with the new microwave oven overnight, and he like locks all the writers in the room, and then he shows the diagram. He's like, we've reinvented the Ford Pinto or whatever. He's just made a compact car out of a microwave. And that's how I imagine a movie like this kind of feels like in post. You get really excited, and you're bleary-eyed, and you're rushing to the deadline, and then you look at it, and you're like, this is a monster. That's okay.
It's odd to me that Stallone's previous film was Lock Up, since so much of this, a third of this movie, it feels like, takes place in prison. And so we're just doing the same thing again. That was even Peter MacDonald, I believe. No, Peter MacDonald did Rambo 3. It feels like somebody else maybe it was Peter MacDonald also had something to do with Lock Up, but Stallone definitely works with the same people consistently if he can.
Yeah, he works with, because it was George Cosmatos did Rambo 2 and Cobra, right? Panos Cosmatos' dad, if anybody's seen Mandy. I think a lot of these people, the famous one we had was Lizzie, if you remember, Kevin Costner and Kevin Reynolds. And then because Kevin Reynolds did second unit photography on Dances with Wolves and had directed Costner in his debut. And then Costner joins him for Waterworld. Oh, actually they first did Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And Kevin Reynolds quit because he hated working with Costner.
I was going to say, wasn't he the one who said that Kevin Costner should direct himself?
Exactly. Because nobody has a higher opinion of Kevin Costner's actor than Kevin Costner, the director, which is a great line. And then Kevin Reynolds just forgot, apparently, or decided, you know what, let's give it another chance. They did Waterworld together, and Kevin Reynolds quit again in Waterworld. I think Stallone, like you're saying, like he likes having his hands on, obviously, and it takes a particular personality to be able to navigate that and maybe give him the fake steering wheel that feels like he's driving the car in the back seat. So who knows?
I will just say, big shout out to the editors and whoever was at this point handling post-production, because I have to imagine that there was a decision to be made when you're looking at this footage of what do we do and which direction do we go in? Because to all of your points, it's just everything. The movie is everything. And I think they could very easily have tried to make it a more serious standard action movie in post, and they didn't. And I think that was really smart. And also the way that the timing, it's very fast, it's very quippy. They did a pretty good job with what they had, I think. And it moves at a good clip. I was not bored. I understand that it's insane. I wasn't bored, and I'm glad that it exists. So shout out to the post-production team.
I agree. If this fell into self-serious territory, like some of the movies Lizzie and I have covered on our podcast, Fantastic Four comes to mind, the movie just slows down to a glacial pace. And this thing, I agree with what you said, Mike. There are pacing issues because the tone of the movie changes a lot, but they, as best they can, are like, all right, we're out. All right, we don't need to explain that. Let's keep moving. And they just get you to the finish line.
Sometimes time slows down when we're watching movies for our podcast. And if your listeners don't know, our podcast covers everything that goes wrong behind the scenes on making movies, whether they're blockbusters or absolute flops. And there have certainly been some times where I'm like, I can't believe there's 45 minutes left of this movie. Do I really have to watch it? We call those the double rentals, because there's times where you have to pay to rent it twice because it was so bad you couldn't make it through it in 48 hours. And this was not that. This was not that.
Yeah. Where it takes you like 4 days to watch an hour and 40-minute movie. Although Lizzie, I did tell Lizzie that it was free on Tubi, and she said, does it have ads? And I said, no. And then she said, I'm paying for it because I can't let this movie be any longer than it has to be.
No, you said it did have ads, and I was like, I am not sitting through them. Yeah.
We were on vacation down in Dominican Republic, and this was on TV in Spanish. So I got to see it all completely dubbed, which made for a really fun experience. It's probably the best version of the film because I couldn't understand all the quips.
Yeah. Yo soy Raymond Tango, Raimundo Tango.
Yeah, you don't need to hear what they're saying in this. We just recently covered The Crow on our podcast, and what I learned from both that movie and this movie is I don't need a plot necessarily. I don't need really any exposition. I'm okay to just start going.
Lizzie and I were like, there's no story in this movie. And Lizzie was like, I love it. It's great.
Yeah. It's very much that persistence of plot, right? Where you're just like, okay, things are supposed to happen. And as long as it ticks a couple boxes, we're okay. We have people on screen and they're saying things and they move over here and they do some other things. I'm like, okay, yeah, that is about as much logic as this one has.
Listen, Mike, they're not wrong. They just go ahead and move from point A to point B and don't worry about the fact that nothing made sense in between. And that's fine.
I'm surprised they never tried to do a Tango Cash 2 because these guys, well, Stallone...
Didn't it do pretty well?
No. It got skewered by the critics pretty bad, and I don't think it did that. I could be wrong, but I don't.
I feel like I looked at the box office and I was surprised that it wasn't... It may have done a little bit better than breaking even.
I think it roughly broke even, like right around broke even.
That could have been a lot worse.
We've got the king of the franchises with both Rocky and Rambo with Sylvester Stallone. But poor Kurt Russell, he doesn't really have a franchise to go back to other than like Snake Plissken. But that's two. Yeah, it's not like we had a whole world of that.
The Escape duology and two movies spread out by how many years? They were like 10 or 15 years apart. Escape from LA is a lot like this movie. It is bonkers. It doesn't make any sense. I always tell the story when I first saw Escape from LA and they show the map of LA and it says La Cañada, which is an actual town. I thought when I was little that it was La Canada and that Mexico had taken over Canada in this escaped world. I was very dumb. But he didn't, I was saying like he did Universal Soldier, and they did more of those movies, but not with him.
You're thinking of Soldier as opposed to Universal Soldier.
A Soldier, not Universal Soldier. Excuse me, Soldier, not Universal Soldier.
You got like a Captain Ron franchise.
Captain Ron, I think, is the unofficial prequel to Escape from New York because he's got the eye patch. I was hoping for maybe another Executive Decision movie. I thought that was really great.
That was a really good movie. I think Air Force One, though, basically stole that movie's thunder.
I think Executive Decision was far better than Air Force One.
I agree, if for only because Steven Seagal gets killed in the first 5 minutes. And it's amazing. He just gets sucked out between the planes, and you're like, oh, he's gone. We don't need him anymore. Yeah, Executive Decision's great. This whole era is so fun. And we covered Last Action Hero in our podcast, which was like the death of the 80s action movie, because it had become meta, and I actually enjoy that movie. And then that movie tanked in 93. Jurassic Park blows everything else out of the water, and we have a new era in front of us. And then you've got like a Willis who kind of continues making some not great action movies in the 90s, Last Man Standing and stuff, but then eventually transitions into more serious fare. We'll be covering The Sixth Sense right around when this drops, this episode. And similarly, like it was like then Tom Cruise all of a sudden, and the more serious comedic dramatic actor takes over. And like Lizzie, you just discussed The Specialist with Stallone, and a lot of these guys' careers went in that weird action, not quite straight to DVD, but C-movie sort of direction. It was such a brief window, that 80s action window, when you really think about it. It's basically Marvel movies now in a weird way.
It was fun. I say bring it back. There's something about the 80s flavor of action that had so much more of a sense of humor about itself. I think John Wick is the closest thing that we're getting.
Sure. John Wick, Taken, Mr. Nobody. It's basically dad revenge now. They've all become dads. They've aged into fatherhood, be it a dog or an actual human. They've aged into fatherhood.
Die Hard had already come out at this point. Lethal Weapon obviously had already come out at this point. Those two survived the reckoning that took place after Last Action Hero, but not a whole lot of, I guess some of these other Stallone ones did as well, but I wouldn't call Rocky or Rambo buddy cop movies.
They're like the prequels to the 80s action movie, because you had like Rambo, Terminator, Alien, right? Like Alien horror movie, like Terminator slasher movie, Rambo, I would argue anti-war movie more than action movie. But then it's all of their sequels become action movies, like Terminator 2 action movie, Aliens action movie, although James Cameron would say war movie. And then obviously Rambo 2. Rambo just became, what's so funny is it actually became the thing that it was actually attempting to deconstruct in the first movie. Like the climax of the first Rambo movie is him like screaming in anguish, releasing the trauma of what he's been through. And it's almost more like Deliverance than it is like a traditional action movie. And then the second, from everyone on, it's just him pumping people full of lead.
Pumping up his muscles and pumping people full of lead, yeah. It just became who can have the bigger muscles. Between him and Schwarzenegger, so much of who's bigger than the other person.
Which physically, Schwarzenegger would always dwarf Stallone. It's insane. And you got to look at Pumping Iron, that was, I think, 1975. Bodybuilding had gone mainstream in a way that it hadn't before. And it was, it's like the archetypal hero had changed in so many ways. If you look at, we watched Cleopatra, and you look at the arms of the men in the epics back in the day, they were not very big.
I've never seen a gym.
There's a reason.
I love it.
The popularity of the noir films and stuff at the era, like men cut a good look in a suit, but they weren't defeating even, or if you go back to Westerns, they were wiry individuals for the most part. John Wayne was like a chubby dude, especially toward the end of his career. Yeah, he was like bare-chested, but he wasn't a bodybuilder type of guy.
He was just a big dude, which I will say is part of why I very much appreciate the way that Russell Crowe looked at his peak and in Gladiator, because he looks, not to go on too much of a tangent, but he looks real. He looks like a big beefy dude who could absolutely kick some ass in that arena, but he's not cut. when you look at, and I think that this did start in the era that we're looking at here with Tango and Cash, but when you look at these Marvel movie stars, action movie stars, like how jacked and cut they are, I do think it is a bit problematic because it's putting on screen something that is completely unrealistic without, let's face it, probably some kind of medication. Obviously, I won't talk about specific people, but
they are all on some sort of juice.
They are, yes, 100%. I would so much rather see somebody who, like Kurt Russell looks real. And he doesn't look huge. He looks great. And it's the same thing with Russell Crowe. I love it. Like, I don't need to see these just like every ounce of muscle and zero body fat. If you want to do that, God bless you. But I wish that they would put like beefier dudes on screen. Bring back the beef. That's what I say.
This person's more cut, but Eric Bana in Troy, he looks great. He's very handsome, but he's obviously very strong. But he's not, like you're saying, Lizzie, he doesn't look like you can see every ab and striation of everything. Yeah. Early Pratt's gone the way of Marvel, but early Pratt, he was a huggable man.
Give me a layer of fat over those muscles. Early Pratt, A+.
When it comes to Fight Club, to see Brad Pitt, I've never seen a person look the way that he looks, but now I see that all the time. Chris Hemsworth takes off his shirt, and I'm just like, what are these muscles? I don't even know what these things are. And Brad Pitt was showing those kind of muscles in Fight Club.
But he was in retrospect, he looks tiny.
He does.
That's the funny thing. He was actually just super skinny. Right. He was obviously very strong, but he looks minuscule compared to the people today.
Right. But what I was trying to say was that he's that ideal at the time. Like, he's what Ed Norton could never be. And then you see Ed Norton in future things, like even in the Hulk, where it's just like, oh, he's all beefed up now. And I'm like,
American History X.
Oh, God, yeah. And that's what it should be. It should be like special occasions where these people look like this rather than just
if you're going to be a Nazi, get buff. But yeah, because it makes sense with your character in that instance. Like, he's playing a skinhead who's obsessed with his own self-image. So that makes sense. Kurt Russell's, he's effectively brass in Gladiator, right? He's leadership. That's why he's not going to look like all of the soldiers
Russell
around.
Crowe.
Russell Crowe. Yeah, so it makes more sense.
If Kurt Russell had been in Gladiator, I would love to see it.
Oh, I would love that. Him with that twinkle in his eye. Are you not entertained? Yes, Kurt. We are entertained.
And he kind of winks.
All right, we're going to take another break and play a preview for next week's show.
Hail the Conquering Hero, a hilarious satire on the American penchant for hero worship.
He was a fine-looking fellow. He didn't look anything like you at all.
Eddie Bracken stars as a young man who enlists proudly to serve his country, only to be discharged because of his chronic hay fever.
Who told you I was wounded and discharged from the service?
Then you won't have to worry no more. Who's gonna notice anything?
Who's gonna notice?
Slip off the train. We'll tie this around you. We slip up a side street. Your mother's waiting on the front porch. You put your arms around her. That's right. You slip out of your uniform. You sort it away in mothballs, and there you are, home. She's happy. You're happy. Everybody's happy, and nobody's kept in nothing.
2 more fun films from one of America's most honored film directors.
That's right. We continue our discussion of comedies with something a little more traditional with a double feature of Preston Sturges films, Miracle at Morgan's Creek and Hail the Conquering Hero. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts, Lizzie and Chris. So what is the latest over at the What Went Wrong podcast, y'all?
If you head over to our channel, available wherever you listen to podcasts, What Went Wrong, you can check out our most recent episode on Chinatown, which is quite a wild story. That was a really fun one. And then, Chris, what do we have coming up next?
Coming up next, we have Ghostbusters, the original 1984 film, which was voted on by our supporters through our Patreon. And Mike, if it's all right, we'll do a quick plug for that. Guys, if you enjoy our podcast, What Went Wrong, go to patreon.com/whatwentwrongpodcast. And if you join at the $1 tier or any of the higher tiers, you can vote on the films that we cover in the future. So thanks again. And thank you, Mike, for having us on.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They're all available over at weirdingwaymedia.com. And yes, thanks to our Patreon community. If you're over there giving What Went Wrong some money, feel free to come on over to patreon.com/projection booth and give us some money as well. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
Let's do it.